I will call the meeting of the Bellevue City Council to order. This is Monday, November 4th. This is the City Council study session. We are going to begin, but we're going to start because Chair of the Planning Commission is here and there are some issues that she needs to get to, so we're going to bump the Planning Commission to the top of the agenda because development services fees are always last. So, I don't believe we need a approval of the agenda, so we are going to move out of order and take items B and C first. Item B is the 2019 Annual Comprehensive Plan Amendment, CPA, and then item C is going forward, do I have them right in the right order, is looking at the Annual Comprehensive Plan amendment process. So, Mr. Miyake.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members, if I could ask Commissioner Morso to step up to the table as well as the staff. Appreciate that. And just by way of background, the 2019 Annual Plan Amendment is a city-initiated comprehensive transportation project list CPA. And tonight, staff will provide an overview of this comp plan amendment. And then you'll also hear from the Planning Commission Chair on the recommendation on this particular item. The Planning Commission has held public hearings on this and is prepared to provide a recommendation to the Council this evening. After which you hear the recommendation, the request is for the Council to provide some direction to bring this back at a future meeting on your agenda. So tonight we're pleased to have Ann Morso, the Commission Chair, with us this evening. Thank you for being here, as well as Emil King to her left, who is the Assistant Director on Planning, and Nicholas Matz, the Senior Planner, and you're here to present the Planning Commission. So I will turn it over to the team here.
So I can just say just a few words as introduction. So thank you, City Manager Miyake, and thank you for having us tonight here, Mayor Chelmanak and the rest of Council. The Bellevue Comprehensive Plan is a really important guiding document for the city, so we take great care in amendments to it. We have one last remaining proposal as part of the annual amendment process. It's relating to the comprehensive transportation project list that's actually in volume 2. So tonight we do have the new chair of the commission, Ann Morso, as well as our lead staff on this effort, Senior Planner Nicholas Matz. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nicholas.
Thank you, Emil. Mayor, members of the council, I'll just refresh you on our annual conference plan amendment process, our two-step process of threshold review and final review. When the council uses its authority to initiate a conference plan amendment, you go straight to final review. Earlier this year in July, you'll recall that the Transportation Commission brought the results of the Eastgate Transportation Study to you, presenting their work and asking you to then initiate it into the conference plan amendment process. That took place in July. The Planning Commission held a September study session and an October public hearing on the proposals to amend the comprehensive plan. Essentially, and Chair Morso is going to go into detail, but essentially you are swapping out and replacing some of the project list components of Volume 2 of the comprehensive plan.
Are we ready for Chair Morris?
I'm sorry. I was going to hand it back to Chair Morris, yes.
Yes.
My apologies.
Mayor Chelmanak, council members, thanks again for having me. On behalf of the Planning Commission, I am pleased to present the Commission's final review recommendation for the last 2019 Comprehensive Plan Amendment. The summary recommendation is for the Comprehensive Transportation Project List. Moving forward, I'll call it CTPL. The Planning Commission recommended by a vote of 6-0 that the City Council adopt the Comprehensive Transportation Project List amendment to amend the Plan's Volume 2 Comprehensive Transportation Project List with the project recommended in the Eastgate Transportation Study as mentioned by Nicholas. This covers adding new projects to the CTPL, revising descriptions for projects currently in the CTPL, and repealing CTPL projects superseded by this more recent analysis. The Commission's review and unanimous vote on the CTPL CPA reflects a thorough study of the proposed amendment and the application of the final review decision criteria. The commission recommends approving this proposed amendment because the application satisfies all land use code decision criteria for final review of a city-initiated comprehensive plan amendment, LUC 20.30I.150. The Planning Commission's recommendation found that all of the final review decision criteria had been met, noting that the amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan because it is a functional policy component of the overall plan implementation. It addresses the interest and change needs of the entire city because it is responsive to the city's plan for coordinating capital investment with growth. It also addresses significantly changed condition arising out of the Eastgate Transportation Study identified congestion forecasts. And finally, it demonstrates a public benefit as well as enhances the public health, safety, and welfare by reducing the rate of growth in vehicle congestion.
That concludes the presentation, Mayor.
Okay, so this really helps us to implement the Eastgate plan that we have adopted along the way, and these are transportation elements that we'll be amending into the plan, some decision points that needed to be made, as I understand it. As liaison to planning, I'm very comfortable with this. Mr. Stokes, you served on the Eastgate Planning Committee. Any questions as this advances that?
Yeah, I was the Parks Board representative on the Citizen Advisory Committee. Must have been 2009 or 10, wasn't it? Yeah. And Councilmember Robertson was the liaison for the council at that time. And no, I think it's been a great process, and I'm really excited to see things moving forward in that. You know, obviously the transportation project list was very old when it came through, and this was a great opportunity to move things forward. It's good seeing this all come together, and we've had a lot of input from the public, so it's very responsive to that. And I think it's, and also want to compliment the Planning Commission for going through this in a very expeditious and very thorough manner. So this is really excited to see it go forward. I don't have any questions because I think it's laid out very well. Just get them done in the next couple of years and I'll be really happy.
I don't think it quite calls for that, but that is a decision that a future council is very welcome to make. I'm going to actually go to Ms. Robertson, since you were the council liaison there. Do you have anything on the Eastgate plan? This is a important step in that.
Thank you. My only question was about CTPL 21, which has been removed. And is that removed because it's finished?
Councilmember Robertson, if I may, I could direct that question to Kevin McDonald here from the
That'd be
Transportation
great.
Department.
Yeah, I was just wondering why that got removed.
Okay.
And since I haven't seen a lot of, come up, but I have not seen a lot of hats out there that say approve CTPL 21, maybe you can explain what that is also.
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify. CTPL 21 is a legacy project description from the previous adoption of the Comprehensive Transportation Project List that laid out several options for consideration for intersection improvements at 150th and Eastgate.
Okay.
The Eastgate Transportation Study clarified the preferred option and has articulated that in CTPL 19. So therefore,
it.
21 can be stricken from the list as being superseded by the work of the Eastgate Transportation Study.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And then the ones that don't have a project number, will those be done do we have to do something else to give those numbers? Do those need to be added into the
Yes,
TFP or something else?
There will be an administrative process to numerate.
But nothing
the-
else that we need to do?
No.
So I'm very comfortable with this. I'm really excited about all of these transportation changes to Eastgate area, Factoria area. I think that they will be very helpful. That area is very congested. And as the mayor said last week, let's get her done. All right. Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Lee, you had your hand up as well.
Speaking about history, East Side or East Bellevue transportation study has been going on for a long time, 20 years. And it's really great to see ultimately it's coming to great fruition. And as Transportation Commission liaison, the commission actually see the benefit, and the wonderful thing that the Planning Commission ultimately, recommends this transportation element for council approval. It's the close working relationship between the two. It's very important. And so they noted that Transportation Commission and Planning Commission haven't met for a long time. So I think it would be a good thing. I would love to have the Planning Commission and liaison consider having the opportunity to meet with the Transportation Commission on some basis, either regularly or with specific project in mind. I think that would be a good thing to do. So I would let the commission work it out. And
Thank
the
you for
staff.
that, council member.
Thank you.
I'll make note of that. And we have had the chair of the Transportation Commission come to us on several occasions and update us on what they're working on. But I'll definitely make a note of your recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Well, thank you for your thoughtful recommendation. I like what you said, Chair Morris. So you said coordinating capital investment with growth to reduce vehicle congestion. What's not to like? That sounds great. I'm looking forward to getting this done.
Mr. Newenhouse.
Great presentation. And I just want to say congratulations on being selected as chair of the Planning Commission. I too am very comfortable with this, so I'll just add on. I think it's great. This is an area that desperately needs these kinds of projects, as you're all aware of. So very comfortable moving forward with this. And again, thank you for all your hard work.
Ms. Zahn.
Yeah, I'm excited too, because when I was on the Transportation Commission, this was one of the areas we really looked at. And in fact, some of the projects we moved forward with the neighborhood congestion relief was to potentially do some studies and look at this and look at it as a whole area study instead of any one intersection. And so I'm excited to move this forward. I would, my one comment would be, as I look at the Bellevue College connection and how this piece moves forward, I know that they are also, taking a look at what they're doing at Bellevue College. And so if we can also try to move that in conjunction quicker, I think that would be really helpful, because I see that we've got a signalized intersection and a right turn, but that's just a tip of the iceberg in terms of how the students move in and out. 30,000 is a lot of students at Bellevue College. So, thanks.
Good. So I'm hearing that there is consensus to move this forward to adoption of the ordinance on a future council agenda. I think that'll have to be probably in the land use section of the ordinance. While everybody's spoken favorably on the ordinance, I think we do need to do it there. Again, thanks for the work. I'll thank you even more for the next report. I think the direction is to bring that back. Are we looking at bringing that back on the meeting of the 3rd or the 10th? Do we know? Or even earlier?
We have it scheduled for the December 9th meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry, 9th. Okay. Okay. Sounds great. Thank you very much. The next one deals with the issue that we have had with recurring comprehensive plan amendments that are privately initiated, coming to the Planning Commission and then going away at the threshold review point. Council was very interested in coming up with a solution to that issue. And I know staff did a lot of research on that, presented it to the Planning Commission. And Mr. Miyake, I will let you add anything more that you want to add.
I would just add a little background that this a request that came from the council. It was at the June 17th meeting where the council discussed the annual 2019 Comp Plan Amendment Work Program recommendations. And just to reiterate what you said, council members at that time requested the community development staff and the Planning Commission to return with a recommendation with an overall plan on the amendment review process through land use code amendment. In response to that, staff have, as you mentioned, spent quite a bit of time and research taking a look at the process and have made a recommendation to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission studied the staff proposal, and actually I understand made some changes to the proposal itself and held a public hearing, and tonight you'll hear a recommendation from the Planning Commission this evening. Again, after the presentation by the Planning Commission, we are looking for some direction on whether or not to bring this back on a future council meeting agenda. And so again, joining us this evening is the Chair, Ann Morrissey. At the table, stepping up to the table this evening is Matt Cummins, the Community Development Director. And again, Emil King, Assistant Director, is here. And with that, I'll turn it over to the team for further discussion and presentation.
Thank you, City Manager Miyake. I'll make a couple of brief introductory remarks. The City Manager and the Mayor both mentioned that the Council directed the staff to look at this issue over the course of the second half of the year. You all may recall there was some question about whether or not this could be studied and looked at and finished before the end of the year, and that's going to happen pending your discussion this evening if there's clear direction to move forward and bring something back to you here in December. There are three main elements of the process that we looked at when we were taking a look at this issue of privately initiated CPAs and their effect on the overall process and some of the comments that we've been hearing over the last several years. In general, those comments fall into a couple of things or areas. One would be length of time it takes to process an application, and if there's enough time both for the staff and the public to work through issues that are raised. And so you'll have a chance to look at that in terms of the time and a new application date for when those applications have to come in. The second is clarifying neighborhood planning and CPAs and how those two things interact with each other. And there's a specific proposal in your material this evening to not accept CPAs in a year that a neighborhood plan is being processed. And then the third element, which is the one that's most highly discussed, is the length of time that someone would have to wait. And I think the council is aware, but the current rule is if you move forward and are denied or don't pass threshold, that 3-year time period kicks in. And the major source of consternation out in the community relates to applications that are being repetitively filed and then withdrawn right before that trigger date, causing the need for concern to come down to a number of public hearings. And so I'll hand it off to Emil, but we did some research on the types of applications that have come in over the last 10 years. And there have been 46 privately initiated applications over that time period, and 60% of those, or 27, were withdrawn right before the trigger date. So significantly more than half were submitted and then withdrawn right before the point in time where they would have triggered that 3-year date. So this is the problem the council asked us to solve. We took some potential solutions to the Planning Commission, and we'll talk about what occurred there and then be happy to answer any questions.
Chair Morris, or Emil, were you going to
I was going to say
continue?
a few words. Yeah.
You're going to continue, okay. Or questions?
I was going to continue on
I'm
with
sorry,
the presentation,
okay.
if it's okay.
Okay, I'm not
so-
seeing the pass off here. I don't have a teleprompter.
So just to pick up on the work that staff has done over the past few months. So based on the direction we received from council back in June, we've spent considerable staff time looking back what happened over the past 10 years with the types of privately initiated amendments that have come in. We reached out to a number of cities to figure out what their processes were and if we could learn anything from their processes. And we have a number of staff who are both new to the department that have some good ideas, as well as staff who have been around for a number of annual CPA cycles. So we're kind of a lessons learned from what's happened in the past. We held a study session with the Planning Commission as well as a public hearing on October 23rd. The materials were out at the beginning of October, so there's plenty of time for the public to kind of see what was being proposed. And tonight we are seeking direction from the council to return just in the coming weeks with an ordinance that would put this land use code amendment into effect. So it's actually a land use code amendment that is where the annual comprehensive plan process is laid out. And just to affirm that this process is for what are called privately initiated comprehensive plan amendments. This in no way affects the council's ability to initiate what are called city-initiated plan amendments. So just to be crystal clear about that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Chair Morso.
Thank you, Emil.
As mentioned by Mr. Miyake and by Mr. Cummins, in June, the City Council directed staff and the Planning Commission to examine whether amendments to the comprehensive plan amendment process are necessary to respond to changing needs or conditions of the city which have been identified in the review process for privately initiated amendments with the following concerns: the use of the 3-year limitation decision criteria in practice, acknowledging the uncertainty caused by reviewing site-specific plan amendment proposals during great neighborhoods work, and express neighborhood frustration about the disruptive frequency of plan amendments. The proposed LUCA is intended to address these concerns and to maintain the integrity of the comprehensive plan amendment process. The Commission's recommendation is a solution that addresses all stakeholders' interests and continues the plan amendment process goal at reaching community-based decisions about how our city will continue to grow. On behalf of the Planning Commission, I am pleased to present the Commission's recommendation on proposed amendments to the text of the Land Use Code for Section 20.30I governing comprehensive plan amendment processes. And Emil will take us through that.
So I'll briefly walk you through the 3 amendments that are being proposed tonight. The first one relates to what's called the 3-year rule or the 3-year limitation. So historically, we've had that measured at time of threshold review. The recommendation from the Commission is to have it apply from point of application. So that's in a nutshell what that recommendation is. It would also apply to any properties that are added to that annual amendment through a geographic scoping process that occurs near the threshold review. The second point of the recommendation is to not allow privately initiated plan amendments to occur during what's called our great neighborhoods, or what previously was called the neighborhood area planning process. So that would be a new element of the code process for the annual amendments. And the third one would be to change the timing of when we accept applications from the public. And right now, that occurs in December and January. So December 1st through January 31st, we would shift that to be September 15th as the date. So as an example, in the year 2020, if you wanted to be part of the 2021 process, you would need to get your materials in by September 15th of the year 2020, just as an example.
Sorry.
The Commission received testimony about the need for clarity in the amendment process that the community, applicants, and many stakeholders found exhaustive. The Commission's review and unanimous vote on the CPA LUCA reflects a thorough study of the proposed amendment and the application of the decision criteria. All of the testimony was in favor of the proposed amendment, including monitoring the ongoing application of plan amendment regulations, such as the City and Planning Commission is currently doing right now. Therefore, the Planning Commission recommends by a vote of 6-0 that the City Council adopt the proposal to amend the text of the Land Use Code LUCA for the annual comprehensive plan amendment process at LUC Chapter 20.30I to include the following: amendments to the initiation of proposal section for consideration of the 3-year limitation decision criterion, amendment to the timing of application submittals, and amendments to the scope and background section for review of Great Neighborhoods area. The Commission recommends approving this proposed amendment because the application satisfies all Land Use Code decision criteria for an amendment to the text of the Land Use Code LUC 20.30J.135. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, and again, thank you for the very good work on this. I'll probably have some comments toward the end. I don't have any very specific questions. Mr. Stokes?
Yeah, a couple of questions just to make sure, make sure we're understanding this. On the first one, so what this means is that once you come in for consideration of amendment proposals and file that at the beginning of the plan amendment, and if you withdraw, you can't come back the next year. You come back in 3 years, right? So it applies a 3-year rule to all applications consistently.
These are privately initiated,
Right.
so from
Right.
the,
That's what I
from the
mean, private
public, so it.
initiative. Right.
Yep, and it is at point of application instead of at the threshold review, which we're all used to. Staff does offer basically time with potential applicants, so just coming in and talking to community development staff about their ideas for things. You are not penalized for reaching out to staff and kind of thinking through your idea. It's at the point of saying, this is what I want to go with, and making a formal application. That's when the 3-year rule would kick in.
Okay, and this would be probably, well, it shifts the conversations between developers and the community, in a way. I mean, the way it is now, somebody applies, and some time goes by, and then they start working with the proposal to the community, and there's some feedback from the community. When something happens, and they decide not to do it, as long as they withdraw before the end of the year of the term, they can come back the next year. Under this scenario, they would file, and conversations with the community could go on, and if for some reason they decided that wasn't going to work, that would be it for for that term.
Yeah, a bit more thought needs to go in
Yeah.
before applicant actually filed a formal application is, I think, the way we would term it, I think. Go
And
ahead.
so, at the Planning Commission, I assumed that one of the conversations was this would help foster maybe discussions earlier than is taking place, so things aren't quite baked once they come in, and there would be more discussion between the community and the developers to what, so people would have an opportunity to kind of get together before something was finalized. And as you said, part of the concern that everybody had was the kind of the turnover, where you're continually having people come in and for some reason pulling out and then coming in the next year and the next year. So that should change the dynamics of that. And everybody is the feeling this is positive. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, okay. The other one I had was this September 15th. That seems to make a lot of sense. It's really getting it in instead of the end of the year frantic, how that goes. So that's good. The last question I had was just in terms of consideration of the great neighborhoods planning. We talked a lot about that. We want that to be a good process. And I guess tying that in with the 3-year limitation, that probably has a good effect. The concern is that as we do the great neighborhoods, sub-area planning, we don't make that a multi-year project. And so if you take say a shopping center or some area that somebody wanted to, and the community wanted to be redeveloped, but they also are going through this process, this might tend to have that potential of something coming along pushed off for a long time. So I guess it's also tied in with how can this being more effective and efficient, and not having to deal with plans, CPAs in that great neighborhood process would give you time to really focus on what was going on in the neighborhood. But I want to make sure that doesn't become something that gets bogged down and people lose an opportunity to make some changes. So just a consideration of that. I think it'll work great. I think it's much more consistent and the rules are very clear on that. So I'm looking for some good process or some good outcome from that. So thank you.
Okay, Ms. Robertson, why don't you go ahead and ask a few questions. If you are ready to make
Sure.
your comments, go ahead. If you want to wait for other people, that's okay
Yeah.
on questions. It's
Okay, so how do you measure the 3 years? If someone applied for the 2015 cycle and jeopardy attached because the threshold review decision got up to the council, would they be able to apply again in 18 or would it be 19? I'm a little unclear.
So let's take it with the real dates. This would go into effect, and the first round would be September of 2020 when you have to apply, and that's when the 3-year clock starts running.
Yeah, because we are still, for this year, we're still going to have an annual amendment process. So we've passed September 15th. So if it's okay, I can do a scenario that,
Sure, if someone applies in January of 2020, say. Because this will apply to 2020, even though the deadline will
yeah,
start
so it
from
would
the
be,
2021 cycle.
the way that it's written, it's point of application, and it is 3 years from that,
Okay.
time.
So it would be the date in September, which is which? September 14th?
Councilmember Robertson
20th?
just did a.
No, but if it's, I can't remember if it's September 20th.
September
or
15th.
September 15th.
2020.
So 2020, 21, 22, 23 would be the next, September of 23
Cycle.
would be the next eligible. I just want to make sure everyone
The
understands.
24 cycle, so there would be, okay, I was trying to just base it on the other years. So if they applied in 2020 for that'd be the 21 cycle. And then
Yes.
they couldn't apply until 2023, right? Because that's actually, yeah.
If it were
Yeah.
turned down or
And then it'd be the
turned down, the
24,
threshold.
the 2024 cycle.
Yep.
So it's three
3
cycles.
years.
Okay, so I understand that we've had a lot of people pull these before council took action, but my recollection is that we really only have a couple of really repeats. And we had one when I was on the planning commission, which was on Old Main, which was dealt with in the downtown livability. We've had the Newport Hills one, and we've had Bellevue Technology Center. Are there any that I'm not thinking of?
We
That
show
if-
one is Bellred Office, which I think commonly goes as the Banner Bank.
Well, that's
Okay.
come several times?
That was twice.
Twice,
Yeah.
okay. And then Banner Bank, so there's three.
And we have one that was the Newport Professional Center. I show 3 on that one as
Oh,
well.
okay, I
Yeah.
forgot about those.
Yeah.
Maybe they weren't as, okay. So it's 4 then. 4 have been regular in the last 10 years. Okay, I have some concerns about this because, well, for one, we never took a vote to initiate this, which I was looking at the minutes. I forgot that we even, anyway, but that's beside the point. The concerns I have are that we have to have a balance between the fatigue, because what we're doing right now isn't working, obviously, which is why this is coming to us. But I don't know if this doesn't swing too far, because the Growth Management Act allows annual comprehensive plan amendments. And the concern I have is there's really twofold from a policy perspective. One is if people apply for a CPA, and during the course of the processing of that, they learn what the public wants, what the public officials want, and they won't be able to, they could today pull their application, make refinements to make it better for the public, and bring it back the next year or in 2 years. If we do this, I am very worried that the conversation with the public and the other stakeholders will, instead of being productive and making a project better for a reapplication later, or better in that cycle, it will really pit the stakeholders who aren't really excited about the project into a position of, instead of making productive and proactive comments to try to make it better, into a let's just kill it because then it goes away for 3 years. And that's not necessarily good for creating a better outcome for a project. And so I personally I think this is a little too harsh of a penalty, and would like to either see the jeopardy attach at the public hearing, so before the planning commission makes a decision, before they're counting votes, but after the staff has had a chance to work on it and there's been some public discussions, if there's meetings before the public hearing. So that's one point. 2, I'd like to, if we're going to create a situation where we're going to lock people out, I'd like to cut it to 2 years, because that's still a pretty stiff penalty. And what I worry about is that there may be some changes that are really appropriate for a comp plan that no comp plan amendment during the annual process, and it will not be brought because the risk of spending the time and money and learning what the public wants has too stiff of a penalty if jeopardy attaches at filing. And I really am very concerned about that. So some of these things like that you mentioned, the repeats, and I'll just say to staff right now and to my colleagues, I really want every single one of those things that's been a repeat comp plan annual amendment that's failed, it needs to be at least considered and processed as part of the major update. It just has to. I mean, and we'll get rid of a lot of them, and then we won't have this problem. Because we didn't have this problem when I was on the planning commission. We had a couple that came back, but not like this. So maybe it's the annual update, or not the annual, the major overhaul update every 8 years is the time to really take those up. So I really hope that we will be very proactive about at least considering those in a fair and balanced way. And then I had a conversation today with the Director Cummins. I think that what we really need to do is look at, and we've talked about this before, of having a very comprehensive development agreement chapter. Because some of these things, we could get so much public benefit and more than what is under the land use code today if we had a development agreement process for it, where we could really look at, okay, how do we figure out a way to let people use their property in a way that doesn't overburden the neighborhood, that we get the mitigation we need, and that we get this even more public benefit than is already required. That, I think, is really the solution to this. It's not because we're trying to fix this with what I think is a gnat, and we're trying to hit it with a sledgehammer. And I think that we should fix this so that people can't keep doing the repeat, make jeopardy attach earlier, like a public hearing, make it a 2-year lockout since it's an earlier period before there's a vote, and then talk next year potentially about doing a work plan. The other issue with having a 3-year lockout is if there's an opportunity that comes up in the private sector and say someone sells their property after they've been locked out for 3 years, there's no way to address that unless they come and have the council initiate it. So I think that this just is a little bit too far. So those are my questions and my comments. Thank you.
Councilmember Zahn, followed by, Councilmember Lee, were you looking to talk? I thought, yeah, okay, great. Councilmember Zahn.
Thanks. I like the idea of the September 15th. It seems like that would be an opportunity for staff to also get ready for here's how many we're getting for that next budget cycle, so that if we need to be prepared for the level of staffing that we're going to need, because you might have 1, you might have 8. You never know, right, in any 1 year. So I think that makes sense to me. My question was, the language said something about applies only to process for review. So can you explain why it only applies to process for reviews? Is that just a nomenclature I'm not as familiar with? The 3-year limitation, it says this 3-year limitation applies when an application is submitted for process for review. So the other process types are not subject to this?
If I may, Councilman, the conference plan amendments are conference plan amendments are legislative authority of the council, and you grant that through process for review. It's simply that's the process where we do those things. We don't do them anywhere else. When you do other conference and plan related stuff, it's all still comes back through a process for review.
Okay, so that language, whether it's there or not, it would only be a process for.
That's
So
correct.
that was
No
just
matter
more
how
like-
you influence a comp plan amendment process, it's a process for. It involves hearing, recommendation by the commission, and then a return to you for study and action.
Okay. And then the other question, we got some comments about choice of words with when we might consider a specific neighborhood sub-area amendment. And it seems to me that if I look at this language, there is some language in there that says shall, some says should. Now we have one that says may not. So can you help clarify what these words mean? And is there a hierarchy of meaning if we use shall versus may not? Because our presentation says it's prohibited, so I think it might be good to be clear.
Would it be okay? So that language where it says may not apply, that is intended to be prohibitive. That is telling an applicant coming to us that they can't do something.
Okay.
Not us saying a choice. And we vetted that concern that was expressed to you with the city attorney's office, and the city attorney's office is comfortable with the language that's been presented for you now.
Okay, thanks. And then you talked about lessons learned and ideas from other cities. So when you were looking at this language about the 3 years and when it starts, is that based on what you're seeing in other cities too? That in that, let's say someone submits September 1st, if ultimately it doesn't go all the way through the process, whether they withdraw or it doesn't get approved, that 3-year threshold? I'm just trying to understand if we're unusual or if that is pretty standard in other cities too.
So let me just offer a few, there's sort of two concepts there. One is the application date and what our city's doing. Most cities are taking in an application somewhere before the next year, and it varies everywhere from like we're looking at a September date to a full 18 months out, like early in the summertime. So there's a range, but this is certainly very consistent with what we, found. Now, on the 3-year rule, that is, I would say not nearly as consistent an answer in terms of what's going on in the other communities. This is definitely a solution that we're looking at relative to the issues that have come up here in Bellevue.
And the issue is that 60% of the CPAs are withdrawn before they go all the way through the process. Is that what I heard? 27 withdrawn out of 46?
Yeah, I would say that's a statistical number, but the principal issue is that concerns are being raised each year about the process in totality as a result of submittals and then withdraw, and then submittals and withdraw, and in many situations on the same site by the same individuals.
And with the same application information, so what happens if they have some new information and they're actually making significant changes that are reflective of comments? I'm just trying to understand, is it all-inclusive? No? Or are there opportunities if they actually significantly change the application to reflect the kind of comments that they were getting?
I think I'll answer in the big picture, and then I'll turn over to Emil. So when you propose a comp plan amendment, you're actually just proposing a very discrete action. You're going from one land use category to another land use category. Now, so that in and of itself is a yes/no toggle. Sometimes a developer will say, well, if you give me that, then I'll do something else, maybe beyond that, but that's really not a part of the application. The application is I want to go from this category to a higher density, higher intensity category.
So really, any of these discussions should have happened before September 15th so that if there's some consultation with staff to be able to better understand what options they have for their property and before they ever apply. Is that right?
Yes, and we make that available.
Okay, then it makes, I understand. It seems to me that when we have that many, even if we're saying there's only 5 repeat offenders, that's still 5 repeat offenders that we're spending an awful lot of time dealing with, as well as our communities, so I appreciate you doing this work. Thanks.
Mr. Lee, then Mr. Neuenhuis, and then the deputy mayor.
I don't really have a specific comment, but I kind of agree with Councilmember Robertson. The question I want to clarify is the way it's done now. If they're denied, then they have to wait for 3 years, right? Yeah. So now you're making it that they can actually withdraw, and that's when it's the submittal date. So they're not going to be able to buy the 3 years period. They have to either decide to go ahead or not to apply. So that's really more certainty for us not going through the exercise. The question is, what does it mean for the applicants? The way it is now, they can kind of test and play games with us, right? So we're spending a lot of unnecessary time and whatever. So I think in that sense, it's probably a good thing. I would say it is. But then it addresses Councilmember Robertson's concern in some way. I'm not quite sure what that means. So maybe a little bit of insight. That might be helpful.
I think specific to the, it sounds like the 3-year rule is what you're bringing up. I
Yes.
think that the repeat applications they have taken, a certain amount of staff time
Yes.
to process, but I think probably more taxing, I think, in what we heard during the public hearing was just the community's time on
Community
having
gets all hyped up,
to
involved.
ramp up and look at the issues. And while it might be slightly different from year to year, at least the community was saying it felt like pretty much a very similar proposal from year to year that
Yeah.
didn't have as much new information in it. So I think it's not just the staff capacity, it's just the community's capacity to, what they felt like was continually having to talk about things that they thought should be more thoughtful before they're applied for.
But in terms of Councilmember Robertson's interest or thought thinking, that if you have a discussion with the community, at least you're getting some input from the community, so it might help for the future application. Do we lose that, or can we still make that possible so that we are? I guess we can provide that as part of the process, right? Yeah, it's up to them whether they want to continue to talk to the public or not in preparing for the next application.
Right, there's other mechanisms for developers and the city to engage with the neighborhoods besides just the annual comp plan amendment process.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Mr. Neuenhuis.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. And generally in favor of most of this. I'm going to also want to address the 3-year limitation. While I agree with my colleague, Councilmember Robertson, with the 3 years seeming a little bit punitive, on the other hand, the massive effort sometimes that neighborhoods have to put together in order to have their voice heard. And let's face it, with our massive growth in the city of Bellevue, I think I can envision more and more pockets around the city where a neighborhood is not going to want a certain development. And I can think of a development in Northeast Bellevue that it doesn't matter if it's 3 years, 6 years, or 9 years. Most likely, there's going to be a fight, and they're not going to want that in their neighborhood. So I'm just wondering if there's a way we can slice this a little bit, where we have a case where an application is put forward for a same project in the same neighborhood, where it is repeatedly doesn't meet threshold review or for whatever reason is denied, that we don't kick in that 3-year until after it's been denied like once or twice, for example, and then it kicks to a 3-year before a developer can come in and apply again for that same project. Now, I might need the support of my colleagues to move something forward like that, but I wanted to at least put that idea forward.
Okay.
As a way, because I do appreciate the fact that you are trying to address the neighborhood frustration and the disruptive nature of these plan amendments. So I really appreciate that, and I'm sure the neighborhoods and the residents really appreciate that as well. But again, I just see this going forward. I think there's going to be more of this, and quite frankly, I think there are just some areas of the city where residents are going to be very protective about certain areas. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
I think the current process design has kind of created a reactionary process for the neighborhood, for the staff, and for the developer. I don't think it's helpful for anybody, and I watch our residents work so hard to build a case for or against something, and then it's all for nothing. And, they're very intelligent, professional people. They shouldn't be wasting their time on things like that. So I would like to get a little feedback from Chair Morrisseau on the public process that you went through in recommending this to us. And then also, I'd like to get some feedback from staff on some of the issues that Councilmember Robertson brought up and that Councilmember Neuenhuis proposed. What would be the impact of his proposal, and what are your thoughts on the issues that Councilmember Robertson brought up? And, sorry, the one in particular that Councilmember brought up was, what is the burden on the developer to move ahead with this proposal?
So if I may, I'll tackle the first aspect of the question, which is the feedback on public process. So as mentioned by Emil and Mac, we had a public hearing, and we had several people from the community come and talk to us in favor of the proposed amendments to this process, because the community felt really burdened that the applicants had the opportunity to apply, and then as soon as they realized somewhat through the process that it was not going to be approved, withdraw before hitting that deadline. Another feedback that came from the community had to do with the having a CPA in conjunction with a great neighborhood study being done. It was just too much for the community to tackle both. So those are the key point that we've heard from the community. And even Nicholas may help me remember, we even have some stakeholders from the applicant side perspective, and their feedback really was somewhat in favor of this. The only thing that I remember them bringing to the table is that ensuring that we continue to monitor this process to make sure that whatever we put in plan actually works. And if it doesn't work, to make changes accordingly, which is something that the commission and staff is already doing anyway.
Great.
I'll make a few comments on the second part, which was addressing Councilmember Robertson's comments. A developer or an applicant, let's say, how does this affect them? It definitely makes them need to be more serious before they bring down an application, because the city is willing to dedicate significant amounts of resources, not just staff and monetarily, but also within the community to have a dialogue about that proposed change. And so there's no question the city does get applications, not just the repeat applications, but you all may recall we had one submitted this year for R110 in a neighborhood, which is effectively like taking downtown and putting it in the middle of a neighborhood. So those types of things are the types of issues that we're trying to address in this proposed process change. And so the question of how it would affect a developers would need to become much more serious, come down and talk to the city, potentially even go talk to the neighborhoods before they came down with an application that would tie up the land, instead of submitting something, see if it floats, generating all the time and resources, then withdrawing.
Mm-hmm. And what was your comment on Councilmember Neuenhouse's idea?
I think the question of tiering, that's not something that we took up specifically. I think you could imagine, if you allowed that tiering, what the impacts would be. The repeat, applications that you have seen would be likely to come in, see how it goes, wait for a year or two, see how it goes, and then trigger that. I can't say that for certain. We don't know, but that has been the process to date. So that's all we can offer at this point.
I'll just say I'm in support of what's being proposed. I appreciate the thoughtful discussion.
So which cities had 3 years, a similar, I think Kirkland did? Emil, did you do that? Or Nicholas?
If I may, we're one of a handful of communities that do it. Snohomish County, Covington, and a couple other Southeast King County cities do it. We don't actually have a 3-year process with the other east side cities. Kirkland's is a biennial application process.
That's right.
But they don't have the 3-year limit is a handful of cities, as I mentioned, and Snohomish County.
Okay, so it was the biennial, and I do remember the discussion on that. Can you, Chair Moriso, can you give us some thought as to why? I remember actually suggesting which year it would be, but...
Yeah, I remember that as well. The commission moved away from the proposed biennial option that staff actually suggested, because it turns out though Kirkland uses it, they only have 1 or 2 applications a year. Therefore, they can afford to do this. The commission, as is, feels stressed for time when we have several applications that we have to get through before the end of the year so council can do what needs to be done. So if we were to wait 2 years, we worry about the workload with having more amendments for us to process and not have enough time to do the work properly for the benefit of the public and the community.
Okay. So 27 that had repeats, is that, no, 27 of the 46, how many were repeats? So you had, and I'll count their first one and their others. I'm thinking.
We had
No,
four.
I know four, but we've had one that's repeated at least 3 times. I think we've had another one that's repeated at least 3 times. I think one was 2, I think 2 others were 2 and 2.
Newport Hills was 3 times, correct me
3,
if I'm
right?
wrong, Emil.
Yeah, so they add up to 11 of the 27.
Okay, so 11 of the 27, and then the others are ones that were proposed, and maybe after seeing a staff recommendation, discussing with staff, they were withdrawn. They may have been withdrawn once and then never come back.
Whole host of reasons, yeah.
Whole host of reasons, got up to the threshold review, a number of different things. I am really struck that 27 of 46? I was really surprised by that number. That's a lot of work that our staff has to go through. And as others have said, I'm not diminishing the work that communities have to go through, but that just is a very easy process to just throw something on the table, and we've got our staff working on it. You know, there are lots of things, and I know we've had some changeover in staff, but there's lots of things that I would rather our staff be doing than working on somebody's pig in a poke on the comprehensive plan, and I'm going to make a run at doing it. So I think having something that's serious, and I think 2 years is serious. I think 3 years is serious. I tend to personally favor the 3-year as being the one to go with. I also want to say that the comprehensive plan, as we know, is a living document, but it's not a document that's out running around the block all the time. It's actually supposed to be kind of a quiet document. You do your review every 8 years, and maybe sometimes that's 10 years. You take a lot of input in to what should be reviewed in that review. Then I think there ought to be some form of rest period. I think that you know, if you do this, you do a 2-year process, and then people are coming in a year later, you really do want to say, where were you the last 2 years? Well, maybe they just bought a piece of property. Well, they call it speculation for a reason, right? So maybe you did, and maybe it's reasonable, and maybe you come in and maybe it's the greatest thing that we want, and there's really a reason to do it. That can go forward if it gets through threshold review and goes in. But you have to have it be, I think, a really good process or a really good project. I think too many people have treated this as a free ticket to ride on the carousel and reach out, and that's probably the wrong thing. It's anyway, it doesn't matter. And pull for the gold ring, grab for the gold ring. I'm mixing my metaphors, but I'm not a carnival guy. I really kind of think that's why I like this concept. I was thoughtful of the biennial process and had suggested that there was some suggestion that be in odd years. I said to the commission, council hasn't taken a position on it, but I think that they would prefer to have them happen in even-numbered years, just because of things that go on in odd-numbered years that involve council members. So I've kind of come down to this is a good plan. I don't know that it's one that we've got complete agreement on. John, I know you wanted to comment a little bit more, and I think this is worth opening up for a little bit of a second round of comment to see. I think if we can get to something that works, then it's something that can come back with one more touch, but maybe at a council meeting. But if not, it's probably something that's going to, and I'd want to ask this question, what happens if this goes over into, say, February or March of 2020? I mean, I know you can't predict the vote, but is there a practical effect of you wouldn't be able to implement it by September of 2020? So I'm going to want to ask that question, but I think it's worth it to go around the table here again. Mr. Stokes?
Yeah, listening to the comments, I guess I have some concern about, and not seeing what they're at the hearing for the Planning Commission, but some of the characterizations of what's gone on in the past, I'm not quite sure important what I've seen is the reality. There's one famous one that has probably generated most of the two that, there's different parts of the city, but there's one that I think we all think of immediately when you talk about this coming back. And I think what we're mixing up is that somehow or other that in all occasions, the developers are coming in and kind of throwing something in on the table and seeing what floats, and then if it doesn't, then they go back and then they come back the next year, when in reality, there was a neighborhood that had very serious and a lot of good arguments of not wanting to have a development, but also wanted the development to happen in their same place. And what concerns me is that that same neighborhood, as I understand it now, has a developer who's come in and is proposing something they're really excited about. And when I've looked at it, it's kind of like what had been presented before, but they just like the way it's kind of focused, I guess, and had more conversation. Plus, the people who live in the neighborhood have changed somewhat too. I mean, the development growth is happening, change is happening so fast in the city. 3 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe 3 years would be rational, but I'm just having a little bit of concern of whether that's, in the long run, will have an adverse effect on, particularly if you're not letting anybody come in 3 years. We keep talking about a person, developers who come in and they come in every year and they do it and pull out. The fact of the matter is, actually, there have been several different developers in this one project. So it's not as if there's just one developer who's playing games. And that was both of the projects that were turned down, or they took out at the last minute. In fact, one of them, I think, by the vote of the council at that time, would have gone forward had they not taken it out. They were serious. It's just that there were some real issues with the community, and so that happens. And I'm just concerned that we may be putting something in that is that just causes some kind of what I'm trying to say, the medical term, not arthritis, but kind of a barrier to some change. Of what if 2 years afterwards you have people in the community saying, you know what, this neighborhood, we need something here. And there's some people who want to do it, and 3 years aren't up, and they have to wait. I don't know. I'm just a little concerned about this is an overreaction to a concern that there might be different ways. But I do like if it focuses us, and I think what the director is saying is that maybe if we have a process that we actually have developers come in and you have a working relationship before you file the application. But you can, in effect, go forward as if you're going to have an application and you have your discussions. So when you get serious with it and you work out with the community, then you file your application. That makes more sense. But I'd like to see that. I think that has to be developed before I can feel real comfortable with it. But I do agree we need to address this. And as I said before, I think I just would like to have some more conversation. I think the mayor is suggesting it may take us a little more time on this, but overall, we do have to do something. We have to be more nimble also in making these decisions, and I think we're going to have a lot more of these coming up. So it's a, I think you made a good effort at it, and I'm just not. I'm kind of there, but not quite. So you understand what I'm saying on it.
Who else would like to weigh in? Ms. Robertson.
I appreciate the conversation, and I agree with Councilmember Stokes. A couple questions that came up as I was listening to the discussion. The other cities that have the 3-year gap, do they have a point in time when the 3-year gap attaches?
I'd be happy to research that for you.
Okay.
I don't recall that.
If it's an application or, okay. So, and then I had forgotten about the check back. I think that would be a really good thing, perhaps to have this calendared for the council check back after the major update, so like in 2024, 2025, to see how it's working. I think that would be really good. I also didn't weigh in that I appreciated the new application date and the keeping the great neighborhoods separate. What's the application fee for a comp plan amendment? Is it about $3,000?
Ma'am, it's deposit fees. It totals roughly $900, and then there's a sign fee, and that pays for review time for development services, utilities, and transportation. So it's roughly a $900 fee with a $200 sign, so about $1,100.
Oh, okay. And then, so do we spend a lot more than that, or do they pay for actual costs?
So the majority of the time that's spent is actually community development, and we do not bill our time.
Okay. So one of the things we might want to do is increase our fees so that it covers more of, this is more of an application. I know it's a legislative matter, but it's more of an application. And if we are getting, I mean, we're going to deal with this repeat thing, but we might want to think about the cost recovery on comp plan amendment applications because they are for the privately initiated ones. That's just a side point. So I like some of the conversation I've had around the table. If, you know, I certainly don't want people to do it year after year after year. What are other ways that developers can engage with the neighborhood to get more input on a project apart from the formal comp plan process? And they can't make people come, you know, and talk to them.
No, that's correct. Certainly, developers can't force people.
Nor should they be allowed to. Let's just be clear on that. You know?
You know, our process is set up right now to be an application has come to the city, and then the city facilitates those types of community dialogues. There are certainly other venues, you know, where these kinds of things can be discussed more in the abstract. The city generally doesn't facilitate those because we staff and facilitate formal applications, and to Chair Morisso's comments, there's enough in the calendar right now to keep everyone involved in this process very busy on the applications currently pending before the city. I might try to merge two concepts Councilmember Stokes is talking about and Councilmember Robinson, you're talking about. The idea around fundamentally shifting vision through a CPA, meaning the idea of the R110 application, that's a major comp plan update type of concept. And so when the city looks at CPAs, those are supposed to be very minor in scope or something incremental that may have come up in between the major comp plan updates. And what's getting blended here is apples and oranges being thrown into the same bushel, which is to say you'll have a developer or owner say, well, why don't I take a run at what would otherwise or should be a major comp plan update visioning concept and try to upzone, you know, incrementally year over year over year outside of that process. So that's one of the big concerns. And what you're getting at is, well, if we talked about a development agreement process, which is really a development review kind of thing, how does zoning work? What are the setbacks? It's a very different idea. Design of a project is very, very different in terms of, you know, where parks should go and what types of exactions, you know, the city should be able to get at the time of upzoning from kind of a discrete yes/no, where someone asks the city for a comprehensive plan amendment that substantially increases density and fundamentally changes vision. So it's a way to try to bridge those two things. It's been on the work plan for quite a while to talk about development agreements. There, of course, are competing interests for staff time and things the council's, you know, interested in, but it remains an issue that we like to look at going forward in terms of development review, but very different than the comp plan and the administration of the comp plan. So these things come as this discrete yes/no, and in those situations, developers are asking you to simply significantly upzone properties without the ability to do what you're talking about. And so the reaction you're talking about today is, if you're going to keep that process, assuming you are, do you want to make that a very serious application?
So, and I know that I'm just making this probably more complicated, but I think that we need a nuanced approach to this. What if we had a major and minor comp plan amendment? So a minor one would be zoning that is no more than one step more intense than the current zoning. And that would be a different criteria than one that is not minor. Anything that's not minor would be major. And the major ones would have a lot more process, and would be, if they couldn't be easily done, then maybe push those into the 8-year update. I mean, I know that this is, it'd be easy just to say, okay, rubber stamp, do this, but you know what I mean? So, I would like to have a little bit more of a nuanced approach to this. And I am absolutely in favor of getting rid of the annual, throw spaghetti on the wall, see what sticks, or come back year after year after year after year. If we did 2 in a 3-year period, then there's a 3-year gap from the second. I mean, I don't know how we do it, or if there's just a 2-year gap anytime upon application of filing. I'm okay with some modifications like that, but boy, we might want to think about, because the minor amendments based on changed circumstances are different than something that, as you said, substantially changes vision. So, do you have any comments about that? This is something I didn't discuss with you, because I'm just thinking of it as I'm sitting here.
We have not talked about or evaluated such a thing. I'm not sure if any cities here do
Yeah.
that. I have seen that done in other cities and other states. And then it gets down to what do you want to define as minor, and how there start to be games played with what's minor and what's major.
Of course.
But if the council's interested in such a thing, we could certainly start taking a look at that. It would be a significant amount of research just to try to figure out how our comp plan's currently structured and how to look at what is a major and minor change to the vision, that sort of thing.
And maybe if we can find a way to tailor this, we could talk about that when we talk about development agreements and look at overhauling how we're doing things. But anyway, yeah, I think a 2-year gap would be acceptable to me on this, if it's going to be at the time of application. And then we do need to have a look back. And I do expect that a lot of these repeat ones, if they're still around, will at least be considered. Do we have a way for people to put things into the hopper for the major update? To make sure stuff gets,
For the major comprehensive plan update, which is due for adoption in June of 2023, we would go through a scoping effort and a blessing of the scope of work by council.
okay, and I hope that anyone who's had a withdrawn comprehensive plan amendment will be made aware of when we're scoping, because it would just be good, then they can have a reality check on if it's part of the vision, and then we don't have an exhausted public. We just have this one major update. And I would be in favor of holding no comp plan amendments, although the GMA says it's an annual, we can do it annually, in the first 2 years after a new plan is adopted, except for to correct errors.
That would be public initiated,
Yes, or privately initiated.
or privately initiated, yeah.
Yeah, I would be in favor of something like that. There's a lot of stuff we need to do on the comp plan process, including the whole threshold review stuff, which we've never gotten to in 16 years since we've been talking about it, but maybe now is the time to be a little bit more refined. Thanks.
Okay, we've got a half hour left and we still have development fees. If that does have to go over to the main meeting, we will. I think it's a relatively short, and I'd like to get through this. Councilmember Zahn, Councilmember Neuenhuis, Councilmember Lee.
Okay, thank you. So as I'm listening to all this, I support really looking at the CPAs coming in as serious applications. Like we were talking about earlier, the ability to come in as a pre-application and really understand. Because this isn't just, we've been talking about developers, but we've had lots of discrete property owners that have come in too, and making sure that they understand what they're signing up for when they turn in that application as well. So I think that's important. For me, as I'm listening to this, I'm inclined to support what is currently on the table, predicated on the fact that we know that there's going to be a major update in June of 2023. So this kind of gives us an opportunity to clean this up, make sure that folks aren't going to keep coming back doing this stuff. And then as we do the major comp plan amendment or major update in 2023, after that, it gives us a chance to say, well, how's it happened in the last couple of years? And then what are the right things to do going forward? It seems like there's a natural break point in that 2023 for us to do that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Because anything else, we're trying to define major and minor and everything else. or this idea of looking at development agreements. I think that's a much longer and heavier lift. You know, when we tried to talk about development agreements on public stuff, there was a lot of angst in the community about that. So I don't think that just because it's privately initiated that it will go quickly through a process.
Okay. Councilmember Newenhouse.
Thank you. And I do agree with Councilmember Robertson's idea about increasing fees. I think there's some value to that. We should look at that again to recover our costs because of the massive amount of work staff is having to do. Again, I'll go back to my point earlier, even though there might be some pushback, but I think that 3 years again does sound a bit punitive. I think Councilmember Stokes makes a good point that neighborhoods change, needs change, things change in general. I think the goal here is worthy, and I think 2 years is still something that developers would have to, take their time and be very thoughtful about submitting their application. I still think that's a fair amount of time. I definitely want to get away from the year to year. But what I would like to see too, on a tiered approach, if twice an application has been denied by the same developer for the same project, that third time, maybe that's when we kick into the 3-year or 4-year. Because they've had 2 chances, and clearly there's a disconnect between what those residents, what that neighborhood wants or needs, and clearly that might show that they're not able to come to an agreement and come to a satisfactory project that everyone can buy into. And I think that would achieve all of our goals as well. So I wanted to pass that along as well. Any response to that? Any thoughts?
I think I sort of heard two concepts, not following the exact number of years there for each of the tiers. One would be a proposal to go from the 3-year recommended time period, to a 2-year time period, and I've heard some discussion on the council for that. The second would be to consider an option B, which would be an escalated tiering, starting at some period of time, and then getting proactively longer if it's the same application that keeps getting denied. So the way I might parse it for the council, if you all believe that a way to address this community issue is to look at a length of time and the application date being the trigger point, I hear sort of consensus around that concept, and you're agreeing or disagreeing on the number of years. I hear some of you saying 2 years, is what you'd like to be. Some of you are saying 3 years. And so maybe you're a lot closer than it may feel as the dialogue's kind of bouncing around the table.
It's a good analysis. Mr. Lee, then Ms. Robinson.
We heard a lot of good ideas, good suggestions at the table, but we have to keep in mind that this applies not just to developers, but applies to citizens as well, who may come in. So raising the cost application fee is probably a good idea for people who just try to do it in a business frivolous way. But for real serious, property owners, that's probably not the best idea. But I don't know. We're just sort of talking, coming up with ideas after being briefed by the staff for less than an hour, and we're making decisions. Unless we're ready to say approve the staff proposal, and based on what Councilmember Zhang maybe suggested, this is a temporary thing that we will make adjustment a few years out from now. Otherwise, I feel that based on what I heard from Director Cummins, that they have been thinking about this major change. In a way, you've been thinking about this for a while. So it's a big issue, right? Land use, big issue. And we don't know what our land use situation is going to be in the future. It's going to be changing. So I really believe that unless we can make a quick decision, have a temporary, short-term solution, because the Planning Commission is facing time crunch, and staff is facing a situation where they have to perform and work. I would suggest the plan, and I think Mayor got some good ideas, and Councilmember Robertson has obviously good ideas. This probably is an issue, a topic the Planning Commission need to really address, working with the staff, really coming up with much better solution based on what you heard from us. And maybe, as I mentioned, short-term solution to fix it for a few more years, but in the meantime, develop a real good, comprehensive solution to this whole process. How do we make it work for the longer term? This might, yeah.
Councilmember, or Deputy Mayor Robinson.
Yeah, so I feel like the Planning Commission went through quite a process on making this recommendation. You went through a public process, you had discussion amongst yourself, you had feedback from staff, and so now you're proposing this to council. And there's been a good conversation here. Normally, I really like nuance and I like personalized plans for things, but when it comes to development, I know that predictability is really important and removing the subjectivity as much as possible. So I think just coming up with a flat year, it would be, in my opinion, I'm fine with the 3 years, but if 2 years is what everybody else wants, that's fine, but I would pick a flat, not a nuanced approach to that. I do like the idea of the look back at a certain point, and of course, the recommendation that you're bringing forward for the separation of the GN and the applications, I also agree with.
Okay. I do want to say that I think that there are, I mean, the amazing thing is of 46, if I'm doing my math right, and math was not my best subject, but that means 19 actually went forward. And I can remember of some that were turned down by council at threshold review. So, I mean, that, to me, that is those numbers, that data tells me the system isn't working right. Okay, so, and I guess the question becomes, what's the cure? I think the 3 year makes an awful lot of sense. If we want to do 2 years, that pretty much gets most of this up into the 2023. Most important, it gets me past the next 56 days. But if we want to do something with 2 years, I think that that's fine. But I think the other elements that were laid out by the commission are really important. I think on the fee, thank you for asking the question. I wish I had asked it. For $1,100, we've put staff and everybody else through all of this. I mean, that's pretty amazing that you can do that. I think that's something you look at as a fee ordinance, okay? That's something that's done separately in my mind from this, but I would encourage going forward that you take a look at that. The other part, and I think it was mentioned, Councilmember Stokes had to step out for a call. What happens if after something, a neighborhood and a developer or a property owner come together and they, all of a sudden they have solved the big issue and now they're in a 3 year period where they can't do anything? Well, that's not true. That's why you have council initiated and we're not affecting council initiated. So in a sense where that happens, then there's a path to do that. I will say, also going with whether it's 2 years or 3 years does make this the type of thing where developers or property owners are going to want to come direct to council and ask them for a council initiated. I also think we've gotten a little bit away from the process here. And I know with the Planning Commission, they've struggled with it because it's a little amorphous, and that's the threshold review. Threshold review is one step in the process. It is not approval. And I know in a couple of cases there were some very good argument about why threshold review, why the threshold had not been crossed. But for the most part, I hear when a public comes down, they're just arguing against something happening in their neighborhood. They just don't want it. That's not the purpose there. And so I think there needs to be some, I think that having a time period will put some pressure on that threshold review question because they've already begun the clock rolling. I don't know that 2 years or 3 years will make a difference in that. But as I say, I am in favor of getting this going. And if 2 years does it, and you know we get a good majority of the council or a 7-0 vote, I think that's a good thing. It's a start. I want to say I don't think Councilmember Zahn was suggesting. I can't remember the terminology. I think you were suggesting really let's do a 2 year process and see how that works. there's probably two-year processes before we get into the major plan, so it kind of moves.
Whatever that timing is,
Yeah.
so that when we do the next major update in 2023, that's the pause to say, how did the last couple of years go?
Yeah, and the argument that, well, this hasn't happened in the past, I think it has happened in the past, but I think what we are seeing now with the market the way it is this is going to continue to happen. And the one that really stood out at me was coming in and just being able to come in and ask for R110 zoning in a place where it doesn't exist, and actually thinking that had a chance of going forward. The two projects that have really come forward are very different. You've got, in one case, you have a property owner who, I think credibly, the public in Newport Hills has pointed this out. Basically, to sell the property, he wants to have somebody come in and upzone. And so we continually get a different developer coming in. That's a really bad cycle. On the other hand, is what's been argued before the Planning Commission by the residents of Northeast is, look, the current property owner bought the property knowing that there is a clause on the property that prohibits certain development. Why do we continue to do that? It's sort of the alpha and the omega of those two ends of the spectrum. So I would be willing, although I prefer 3, I'd be willing to put 2 years forward. I'd suggest study look at that, the fee issue. Councilmember Robertson, you mentioned one other thing, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it right now.
We talked about a look back or putting
Oh.
something in here, and where it would come back for reconsideration, to look at this after the next major update.
Okay, I thought there was another thing other than,
There was, let me look at my notes.
it was actually
Well, I talked about the DAs,
no, but it was a specific, maybe it was just the fee.
and I would point out, by the way, on the fee issue, a council-initiated pays no fees.
That's
Yeah, I don't just-
because we initiated it.
No, I know, but you were saying if the neighborhood and developers come to us and ask us to initiate, that would not be a fee.
Yeah.
I just
So
wanted to put that on the record.
yeah, I mean, and you know what? That's a good thing to look at in terms of fees. But I'm trying to find if there is a happy medium to get this done before the end of the year with a 2-year process and the other items. Yes.
So I would be supportive of a 2-year process with a look back put in it, and then I, on a side note, want to look at the fee issue. I think that would kind of be a fair compromise and fair to all parties.
Okay. And I would just say, we look back at everything, but if we want to put, I mean, we have not done well putting look backs into ordinances, quite frankly, but we do look backs. What I would say is just an analysis of what occurred. I don't want I wouldn't want an extensive report of a look back. Mr. That's okay.
Yeah, it seems like when we put them in officially as a look back, we just don't get around to them, so. I think-
Well, it doesn't make it on
I know,
council.
that's
Yeah.
right. The other would like to also think about is how can we, working with staff to have this different approach and get people in a better process, and how can we support that? I mean, I think that's important. And the other factor is even that one community we're talking about, they really wanted that redevelopment in some ways. Just the process and the people, the process was not good. So there's something a little bit broken there too. So I think this gives an opportunity to maybe take a better look at how we approach these things.
Council members on.
I guess I just had one clarification. So I can support the 2 years. What I want to understand, though, is we're putting this new change in place. So the ones that did withdraw before it went through, does it apply to them so that we are literally saying, okay, this went into place, so even though you didn't go all the way through, you are subject to the 3 years? Or how do those ones that are already hanging around out there, how does this apply to them? I just want to understand.
Our work with our legal colleagues, it does not go retroactively back to ones that had applied before and been withdrawn or denied. So it's now moving forward.
Okay,
But-
so on September 15th, we could still have the ones that showed up before show up again. It's just that if they choose not to go all the way through the process, now there's this 2-year pause that they can't actually resubmit.
Well,
But it
they
doesn't-
could actually show up on January 31st of this year and go through the process, because we will still have an annual privately initiated CPA process for the calendar year of 2020.
So the,
Okay.
and to the mayor's previous question about when this goes into effect, the idea is that it is adopted when council is clearly ready to adopt something, and ordinances like this can typically go into effect as soon as 5 days after council adoption. So clearly, we're past the September 15th date, so that, call it provision, doesn't apply to this cycle, but the intent would be that the no proposals for great neighborhood areas and whatever year rule the council is comfortable with would be
Would be
applying.
in place, so even this cycle of any CPAs that show up, if they don't go all the way through the process, the 2 years would apply.
If they apply this go-round, then they would have some type of year rule, and you've been discussing 2 or 3 year. And the whole idea is that people are more thoughtful about applying because they know that there is some type of rule that would limit their reapplication in the future.
Can I follow up on that? Because I had not
wanna
thought of
make
this.
sure I understand
We are in great neighborhoods. It's a little bit of a pause, but we're in great neighborhoods in Northwest and Northeast. The ordinance goes into effect in 5 days. That means that for January 31, no privately initiated in Northeast or Northwest?
That is correct.
Okay, that, I had not picked up on that, so Councilmember Zahn, thanks for asking the question. I hadn't picked up on that. Mr. Lee?
I'm happy to support this as a solution to current situation, where I think the staff and the planning commissions bring up to us, as a solution. But I really like to, continue to ask the director comments, because you mentioned that you have heard all us talking about it. And so you seem to have a thought, working a process, trying to figure out how to really fix this thing right? So I hope you can continue to do that and work with the planning commission and to come back to us, after this is in place, and see what better idea that could be made to fix this thing once and for all. Well, maybe not once for all, but to a better end, right? I agree. You said you've been working on this, right? You got something else going on besides just what we're talking about.
Yes, I think maybe another way to say that is, we have heard the comments about other components of the process that the council didn't specifically ask us to look at, but certainly questions that have been raised here about threshold and moving into final review and those types of things, yes.
To me, this is a temporary, short-term solution for the situation we're in now. But that's not the end, right? Okay.
So if I want to try to sum this up, and I may use a different word on look back, that it is to draft the ordinance with a 2-year time frame. So if someone were to apply September of 2020, they would not be able to apply again until September of 2022 would be the effect if it didn't go forward. So I think that would be the way it would go forward. And that during the and I'm going to just see if this gets it, during the comprehensive review of the comprehensive plan, provide a report within that to council regarding the effect this change has had. Is that what you're getting at?
I was thinking actually we could do that then, but I was actually thinking about evaluating it a couple years after the major update.
Okay, that's why I wanted to.
So, because we're going to have just a couple of cycles before the major update, then the major update's going to be in place for, probably take at least 24 months. Then if we had a couple cycles after that, I think that's the point at which we would know whether it's working, whether it needs to be changed to 3 years, whether, whether it's, whatever the situation is.
Well, I think the rule is it's 6 months after action, we can change it again, but I think that's a thoughtful way of approaching it.
Well,
Thank
that's
you.
the reason why I suggested, I think this planning commission and the director should continue to be thinking of work on this. Otherwise, 2 years from now, or when it's done, 6 months, so what? You have to look back anyway to what we are doing today is going to make a difference. And I think they need to be thinking about it and develop some better way of handling this. Why not starting now? Right? We agree that this may be.
This is what we're doing. We're actually doing something to change something, so you can't study something that hasn't been changed yet. I think you need to study
not studying.
that and analyze and see what happens. And I think there are other elements that we've had discussions of that may come up within this. Again, threshold review, we've had significant discussion about how that applies, what the state law says, and it can be a little amorphous, but, that's kind of the way it is. Do you have enough direction?
I wanted to ask the staff to articulate what we heard and confirm, the timing and when we're coming back to council.
Sure. So we would be ready to bring back an ordinance as early as your December 9.
Actually, we're planning on, we were able to get time on November 18th for that.
November 18th, with a draft ordinance that would change the land use code to implement the 3 main elements, which would change the submittal date for a CPA to September 15th going forward. It would prohibit a CPA from being proposed in a neighborhood area when a neighborhood plan is ongoing through the Great Neighborhoods Program. And it would set in place the trigger date for the timing requirement at date of application for 2 years. Is that what I'm hearing from the council?
And then maybe put something, a section that says it will be, a report out will be made,
Okay.
with 5 years, 6 years, 5 years after this has been taken effect, to, report to the council on the,
Okay.
on the impact.
Yes, and then as a separate item, we'll be
Yeah.
looking at cost recovery or some type of fee analysis.
And that report out, I think, could be in a separate section of the ordinance rather than in the land use code, although it could, if you want to put it in the land use code, otherwise it would just be one of the sections, like above separability.
Yeah, can I speak to that too? I would not want this to be something where someone would say, well, wait a minute, you've got it in code that you can't even consider this until 2025 or 2026. I don't think that's your intent. I think it's to give a target date. So a no later than, or rather than a no sooner than, maybe something about a no later than. So that's, yeah. Okay?
Okay?
All right, I think we don't have time to do the development fees, do we? Let's do census, if staff is here to do that.
Sure. Joining us at the table is Gwen Rousseau, our Community Development Senior Planner, and I think Emil King is going to accompany her. Just to give you an update on the what kind of outreach that the city has been doing in preparation for the 2020 census. That I'll turn it over to the team.
All set. Thanks for that introduction, City Manager Miyake. Let's see, tonight we're here to give an update on Census 2020 and the outreach efforts that the city has been doing in support of that. In April of this year, there was a proclamation by the city about the importance of the 2020 census, and that has helped guide our work in actually working with community-based organizations that are planning on ways to encourage historically undercounted populations to participate in the census. Last spring, the council, with council agreement, we contributed $50,000 towards what's called the Regional Census Fund. We were able to work through a regional process to actually fund 4 organizations on the east side with money that totaled $157,000, and these included the organizations, the East Side Refugee and Immigration Coalition, called ERIC, the Indian Association of Western Washington, the Chinese Information and Service Center, and the Muslim Association of Puget Sound. Each of these groups have been spending the past few months helping educate the communities on the east side about the importance of the 2020 census, and also just raise broader awareness of diverse communities here on the east side. A second round of funding is happening right now that Senior Planner Rousseau is helping with the selection process on that, and there's going to be some key announcements that hope to be made before Thanksgiving to that effect. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Gwen, if you want to give a few minutes of additional oversight of what we're doing, and then maybe allow a few minutes if there's any other council comments.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Emil. Thanks, Council. Just to also mention regionally, the other thing that the city has been doing has they've joined together with other East Side cities to form the East King County Communities Count Committee, and Councilmember Conrad Lee is serving on that. This body is leading collaboration efforts, providing support and sharing materials to ensure that all of our large institutions, including our governments, our school districts, our libraries, the King County Housing Authority, also large social service providers like HopeLink, are all working together to kind of have the broadest outreach possible, ensuring that all of our communities are aware of the importance of the census to our local communities. And then internally, our city has formed a 2020 Census Task Force. It includes all departments. Staff have been identifying ways of raising awareness through just our daily city operations and communications. And our strategy has kind of focused in 3 areas. I like alliteration, so they're in publications, people, and places. And for publications, task force members, along with staff, have been developing a toolkit, kind of a print, audio, and video messaging to help spread the word about the census in multiple ways. Soon to be released will be Bellevue's 2020 census video to air on BTV and to disseminate via links. It features Councilmember Lee, the city's representative on the Census Committee, and in the video, Councilmember Lee highlights why it is so important for all Bellevue residents to take part in the 2020 census. First, because it is the cornerstone of our democracy by determining the number of seats that each state receives in the House of Representatives. Second, because leaders use census data to make decisions. Everyone's response will help guide planning for the future of our community. Most notably, the 2020 census helps guide decisions on how billions of federal dollars are allocated annually for critical public services like roads and schools and hospitals, and hundreds of other programs. The video also lets people know to look for a postcard in March next in the mail. For the first time in 2020, households will have the opportunity of filling out the questionnaire online, as well as by phone and by mail. And then lastly, the video reminds everyone that by law, census responses are completely confidential and that no one's personal information can be shared with any other agency. The video will be translated into 4 other languages just to ensure that everyone in our community knows how to be counted. In addition to the video, staff from departments have been pulling together data on the federal and state funding that's been guided by the 2010 census data to illustrate how achieving an accurate count benefits Bellevue locally. Since 2010, the City of Bellevue has received over $76 million in transportation projects, $7 million in parks projects, nearly $6 million for community development block grants, and over $40 million in just state tax distributions. Other staff with close ties to some of our historically undercounted communities have identified frequently asked questions that are being raised so that we can ensure that we have the right answers to provide information to them. And we've also been, under our people strategy, developing trainings and presentations so that we can educate our boards and commissions and advisory groups, all of our frontline staff, and our partner organizations, such as social service agencies or faith-based organizations or our business community, The goal is to enable everyone to be a census ambassador who can answer questions and direct people to where they can find more information. And then lastly, our goal in the new year is to have 2020 census presence at every city facility and at every city event. And this is where I need your help. If you are speaking at an event anytime during January through April, it would be fantastic if you could include a reminder about the importance of participating in the 2020 census. That will ensure that our community has what it needs to succeed in being the city where people want to be in the coming decade. We'll also be hosting census questionnaire assistance centers and census parties to celebrate, to help people fill out the questionnaire and celebrate being counted, and let people know that, and have people know that their participation will make a difference. So with that, I'll leave you with our census tagline: the census counts, and so do you. Be counted in the 2020 census and help our whole community thrive in the future.
Great, thank you for the update. Councilmember Lee, thanks for serving on the committee. I know Councilmember Zahn has also taken this on. Other council members are very interested in it. So I want it to be the city where you not only want to be, but you want to be counted, and that people will feel comfortable. Everyone will feel comfortable being counted. I think that's also a very important aspect. So with that, we will adjourn the study session, and we'll be ready to go with the regular session shortly. I'll call this meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Bellevue City Council, our regular session, and it is for Monday, November 4th. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Tillman.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Lee. Here. Councilmember Neuenhouse.
Here.
Councilmember Robertson.
Present.
Councilmember Stokes. Councilmember Zahn.
Here.
Councilmember Stokes was here tonight at the at our study session. Thank you. That's that comes with age, I guess. And he did have to go to take care of a family issue, so he will not be with us tonight. For the flag salute, I'd like to call on Councilmember Zahn. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will be, let's see, no, actually we have both of those. We will be adding to the agenda the development services fee report under the report of the city manager. So with that addition to the agenda, I'd ask for a motion to approve.
I move that we approve the agenda.
Second. Moved and seconded to approve the agenda as altered. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries and the agenda is adopted. We are at communications written and oral. We have, I believe, 6 individuals who have signed up to testify tonight, so we should be well within the half hour that the council allots for this. It's possible there are some people who are not as familiar with the rules, so I'll just pass along that you'll have 3 minutes to address the council. You have 3 minutes to address the council. When you come down, just give your name and your address. The green light means your 3 minutes has started. The yellow light means you have 1 minute left. And when the red light comes on, we want you to be done. We take 3 people testifying on any one side of an issue. So if of those people who have signed up, if there's more than 3 on one particular side of an issue, we'll end it at those 3. So with that, I will ask the clerk to call people, I believe, in order in which they have signed up.
The first speaker this evening is Julie Kopp.
Well, first of all, since I always take the negative, I'm taking the positive. And I want to thank your city workers for actually listening to some of our concerns. One happened to be the island right outside the entrance of your west entrance, which is blacktop-like. So at night with poor visibility, my car went right over the top of it. There's no markings on the island, and anyway, I mentioned it, and it's brightly painted yellow, and it has 2 cones on each end, and last time I had the security man come out and make sure I went the right way. So thank you for that. The other one is maybe 2 years ago, we had a concern on Northeast 30th and Bellevue Road, or Way, whichever you want to say. And you can go north and south, and you can go east, but for Microsoft, they can only go one way, which is south. And those employees choose to drive across the sidewalk to get east, or drive across the sidewalk to get west. And so I talked to transportation, and we came up with the idea maybe we could put a post on the island, one end, and a post on the other end, and that has solved the problem. So it lasted for 1 year, and then last year with the snow, they plowed up the posts. But they came out, we called, and they came out and they replaced them. So no more vehicles are using the sidewalk for their lane of traffic. My concern, real concern, happens to be a piece of, well, 2 pieces of property.
So actually, let me take those, and you can go back and keep testifying, and I'll make sure we get them handed out. That's okay. We'll share.
And this happens to be on 164th and, I don't know, probably 27th or 29th. This is a house that is being built in a maybe 67 development, and 1-story houses built by McGrath. And that neighborhood came and petitioned, and they didn't want this house to go in because they're going from one side of the property to the other side of the property, and it's a 2-story house. They've built it on a cul-de-sac, and they came down to talk, and it is now built, and they're making it into assisted living. Eventually, they're going to ask for that. That's an issue. They have no parking, no
Okay.
garage.
So we are at the 3 minutes,
Yeah.
Ms. Cox.
Anyway,
And again, thank you. On that particular issue, if you want to write, that would be really helpful, and I'm
Well,
glad that we have been able to
That
fix the issue.
neighborhood has done everything, and they're stuck with it. So my next thing is what's going on in our neighborhood, and I don't want to be stuck with it. So I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Oh, well, it'll just ring to you guys.
The next speaker is Pamela Johnston.
Pamela Johnson, 3741 122nd Avenue Northeast. I'm here to talk about the comprehensive plan amendment process. One of the things that I really want to see is I want to see the commercial sides of the neighborhoods and the neighborhood side of the neighborhoods be able to work together. And one of the things that I see in the neighborhood plan process is that we're looking a lot at the neighborhoods, and that's good, but it seems like there should be a good side on the other side so that the commercial districts are also getting a look at the neighborhood needs. So the neighbors are telling them, here's what we need, but they also need to say, here's what we need, so that both of their needs can be met together. And when we were looking at the Pikes Peak Water Tower, the engineers at the utilities were like, we need all this, and the other people are like, well, we need all this, and we can't get together. But once they could hear each other's needs and learn each other's issues, they could come together more quickly, and they've actually both chose the same design in that case, but they can see each other's needs. So one of the things when we were talking about the Newport Hills development, one of the things that they were asking and never got was they were asking for some kind of economic development proposal there. So when we're looking at the neighborhoods, what are the economic development proposal for the neighborhood? What's the vision there? You know, are you helping the citizens get an economic development vision and helping the commercials people match that? The other thing that I would like to ask is, we talked about this, the initiatives as if most of them are the development ones, but what about the gun rights thing? These are other things that all go through the community, it's the planning commission, because comprehensive plan goes through the planning commission, but they're not necessarily development things. So we need to think about that as in terms of the fees too, and things like that. And maybe you have one fee for before threshold and one fee after threshold or something like that. So it can give more of a break to people trying to do all that kind of stuff. Yeah, well, that's good enough for today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next.
Next speaker is Charles Watts.
Good evening. Thank you for making time available. My name's Charles Watts. My address is 504 175th Place Northeast, 98008. I'm here as an individual tonight, but I'm also a member of People for Climate Action and Climate Change Lobby, Citizens Climate Lobby, excuse me. My wife and I have lived in Bellevue for over 50 years, and I've been paying business, or have since before I retired, I paid business and occupation tax here in Bellevue for almost 40 years. I've watched Bellevue grow, but I'm very concerned about the climate issue in general and believe that Bellevue, being a leading city, both economically and intellectually, has a role and an obligation to do everything it possibly can to be a leader in this existential issue for the United States and for the world. You've heard the saying, all politics is local. The Supreme Court has said on occasion that the states and cities are the laboratories of the development of the constitutional issues and laws in this country. Bellevue is such a laboratory, and I encourage it to be a leading laboratory in the issues of climate change. I know you're going to be dealing with this next week, but I can't be here on Tuesday, and you've moved the date because of the holiday to Tuesday. I apologize. I have two grandchildren, 7 and 8 years old. They will live into the 22nd century, God willing. Unless something is done in the next 10 or 15 years in a dramatic way by cities like Bellevue, states like Washington, and countries like the United States, and indeed the whole world, those children will have a world that is unimaginably inhospitable to their life and their livelihood and their ability to enjoy that life. I suggest that in your sustainability plans, you do more to increase the rate of vehicle electrification for the city of Bellevue so that when I'm driving around, I'm encouraged to get an electric vehicle because the city's been doing that. You have trucks that could be electrified because they're not driving hundreds of miles in distance. They're driving locally. I encourage you to devote some percentage of storm and surface water drainage revenues to plantings, not necessarily in the city, but to fund plantings elsewhere. This is a sustainability issue that's going on throughout the country. I encourage you to monitor our recycle program to make sure that our recycling contractors aren't just hauling stuff to the dump or shipping it overseas where it's dumped. It does us no good to pay for recycling only to find that that material that we thought was being reused is being dumped. I encourage the city to continue to lead on solar. Its own properties will benefit from being solar, and I encourage the city to educate.
Mr. Watt, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Done with my time. Thank you.
Next speaker is Vishnu Manjapudi.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Vishnu Majipudi, and I live at 1204 150th Avenue Northeast, Bellevue, Washington, 98007. I care about climate because it decides the future of our youth today. Sure, we may not directly see the impacts of climate change in our community, but if we don't take action, it will affect my generation and later generations to come. Last generation, the preventative measures taken to mitigate climate change were not enough to completely solve the problem. Even though we'll have to work harder than previous generations, we still have to prevent this problem before it becomes too large for us to fix. Thank you for the plan update that's being made for the Environmental Stewardship Initiative this year. I'm excited because this is truly a time where many excellent programs and plans are being developed locally and across the country for how cities can make a difference for the climate. Updating a plan now means that our staff and the consultant can tap into that growing body of knowledge and ideas for taking climate action in cities. The name Bellevue is derived from the French words for beautiful view, because that was how it was seen when it was first settled, and I would like it to keep it that way. I'm grateful that the ESI plan update is giving a close look at climate action because it will be the first step towards reaching a more sustainable future. I'm hoping that this updated ESI plan will include bold targets for taking climate action, and I support the council in setting these bold targets. Thank you again.
Thank you. Next.
Karen Morris.
Karen Morris, my address is on file. On the 10 encampment ordinance issue, the narrative has been controlled far too long from predominantly one perspective. The other perspective was always there, doing research, presenting info, and pleading to be heard and taken into consideration when decisions were being made. That has happened far too little and needs to change. During current process, city staff have presented almost no information from this perspective and pretended that our concerns would be addressed by a couple of already granted or proven ineffective changes. That needs to stop now. Ignored has been the fact that my neighborhood has repeatedly over the years met with city staff from numerous departments and often presented lists of specific changes to procedures or regulations we thought necessary to address problems that have persisted for years and still not been addressed. These lists, however, have seemingly been ignored, and those who have them have not seen fit to enter them into the current discussion on ordinance changes. The issues we raised at our focus group meeting were summed up by city staff as wanting increased accountability and responsibility. But we see nothing in the current proposal to substantively address that. We have provided in the past specific changes we thought would begin addressing these problems. Since the city does not apparently intend to present our suggestions for consideration, we must do so ourselves. I begin that tonight by providing you with some past communications and list of proposed changes that we have submitted to the Planning Department, the City Council, the Police Department, and the Mediation Department. Some was also presented at meetings where other departments, such as legal, were present. Proposed changes from one perspective are proposed, and those from the other have been left out and ignored. I urge you to read through these materials and consider the following for consideration during the current process: recurrent warrant and sex offender checks, presence of neighborhood representative at meeting where safety and security decisions are made, lowering the number of residents allowed to 60, define and control loitering in the neighborhood to stop problems in Hilaire Park and neighborhood open spaces, neutral or objective entity holding a copy of the list of residents, and more effective oversight by the host and consequences for lapses in oversight. These would potentially address some of the problems. As to our opinions on the other proposals and on the information presented so far, that will come later. What you have here are public comment at previous city council meetings, at the public meetings before encampments, the lists of changes that we have presented at those, the list that we have presented at the request of certain staff members, something we presented at a meeting with the police chief, something we presented at the mediation. This is to show you that there's a long history of us bringing these same things forward, and they should have gone into this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. And I would also encourage council members, I know you will, but I would encourage you to read them. We have one more.
Well, that was true, and thanks to the electronic sign-in, we've had 3 additional sign-ups since we
Okay.
started. So we have
We're
4.
doing okay on time. I
We
think
are okay
people
on
have been generally short.
Christopher Randall's is next.
My name is Christopher Randalls, 1505 145th Place Southeast, apartment A1, 98007. I'm a Bellevue resident and worker, but I'm also an environmental sciences student at the University of Washington, Seattle. So I attended the ESI workshop back on October 1st, and I sincerely really appreciate being given the time and space to collaborate with some fellow community members and city officials about how we want our city to face the challenge of climate change. And honestly, going to the meeting was really cathartic and heartwarming because the message that I heard at the meeting was very clear to me. It was that Bellevue wants to be on the leading edge of sustainability in the region. So at the end of the night, we did a round of dot voting for each of the city's proposed sustainability sectors. And from what I saw, there was unanimous support behind our city being carbon neutral by 2050. Nearly all residents wanted to be on the forefront of reducing our waste, VMT, and energy use while increasing tree canopy and renewable energy. And with the climate crisis on our hands, it's all the more important that we act swiftly and boldly. So just as a general New Year's resolution this year, I've been trying to read more. And early this year, I picked up a copy of This Changes Everything by Naomi Klein, which is a really great book. I cannot recommend it enough. Really well written. And as a person who already understood the dangers of climate change relatively well, it was really sobering just to hear how big and how large scale the problem really is. So just a brief factoid that you mentioned. She mentions a study from 2011 that found that to keep warming within the 2 degrees Celsius that's recommended by scientists to avoid the largest of impacts of climate change, we need to burn less than 565 gigatons of oil. So that's 565 billion tons, which admittedly may sound like a lot. But if you take a look at the known oil reserves in the world today, that's 2.7 trillion tons. So 5 times more than what we know we can burn, we know already exists in the ground, so we need to keep it there. And with such a big problem, I know that some might ask, well, what role can Bellevue play in this issue? And I would counter that with such a big problem, I think it's important that we have action at all levels of civil society. Bellevue has the power to be a leader in the region and inspire other municipalities and regions to step up their goals as well. So I feel like it's our imperative to both our community and our planet that we do the best that we can. And from the conversations I've had thus far about how to make this happen, I've been really encouraged. So I've actually spoken with Councilmember Zahn. We met at the Lake Hills NEP meeting, and we had a brief conversation about the importance of a comprehensive bike network and how that can provide people with a greater and greener option for mobility, more sustainable as well. I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank Councilmember Stokes, but he's not here this evening, I also saw him as well at the East Trail Regional Advisory Council meeting, and I really got the vibe that he is committed to having a comprehensive, inclusive, and extensive trail network. So I know this council is committed to environmental sustainability, and I'm looking forward to seeing the city be a leader going forward and paving the way to showing what green urbanism can look like. So thank you all.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to suggest that that's 3 on the climate change issue and the ESI, which I believe is coming up for presentation next week. Others who have signed up?
Els Blum.
Good evening, council members, Mr. Mayor. My name is Els Blum. I live at 1010 Rosemont Boulevard in Bellevue. I'm speaking on behalf of Northeast Bellevue and Crossroads residents and would like to start by thanking you for listening to the residents who have grown really frustrated with the current comprehensive plan amendment process, for listening to planning commissioners who are also frustrated by the process, for listening to staff who are probably the most frustrated by the process, but most importantly, for willing to take action to fix the broken process. A staff report shows that over the last 11 years, nearly 60% of privately initiated CPA applications have been withdrawn, and 41% of those were resubmittals. Clearly, the intent of the current 3-year limitation criterion has been circumvented by the majority of private applicants. The proposed amendment would have the 3-year limitation apply as soon as a CPA application is filed. This seems a better interpretation of the intent of the criterion. It will eliminate frivolous applications of the kind, let's tweak it a bit, throw it at the wall and see if it sticks this time. Also, it will drive development to those areas targeted for growth in our comprehensive plan. It'll also encourage developers to engage with the community before they file for a comprehensive plan amendment. The second proposed change would put a moratorium on privately initiated CPA applications for neighborhoods going through the Great Neighborhoods Planning process. This will free up both staff and residents to fully focus on the project at hand, which will give each process or each project the attention it deserves. Otherwise, you risk that resources are stretched too thinly, people will burn out, and neither project can come to fruition. Moreover, this proposal would allow neighborhoods to craft a vision for their neighborhood without that threat of CPA applications that would disrupt the entire process and that go against that vision. The third proposed change is with respect to the application submission deadline. It would allow all parties more time to process a CPA. So in summary, we support the changes to the comprehensive plan amendment process as proposed by staff and the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Michelle Neathammer.
Good evening. Michelle Neathammer, 15897 Northup Way, Bellevue, Washington. I want to thank you for the really great dialogue and conversation in the study session right before this. It was great to listen to all of your comments and kind of hear the discussion and the thought that goes into making important changes like this. I thought it was important to just reground us in why we're here. And we are here because the current process is broken. And I think the intent of the current rules were if you filed an application and the application was denied, it would go all the way through the process. I don't think whoever wrote the rules a long time ago foresaw this withdrawal process happening. So the original intent was that something would get filed, we'd talk about it, we'd make a decision, and you'd be locked out for 3 years. So I don't think a 2-year rule is a punitive type rule. All we're trying to do is fix the current process, and having 3 years to put a pause on things is a reasonable time. It's what everybody expected. And it was really interesting at the Planning Commission meeting, everyone was in agreement that spoke at the public hearing. And I encourage you to all go back and read the testimony. The residents were in favor, and attorneys for developers were in favor of the process. I was shocked. I was not expecting that, but they actually saw this as a good change as well because it provides clarity for all parties. So I encourage you to go back, think about it, and I don't think we need to overthink things right now. The current process isn't working. The intent was let's file an application, wait 3 years, see what happens, and then come back in and revisit it. So I encourage you to think about what staff came forth with the proposal. They spent a lot of time thinking through what was the right tweaks to the process so that we could fix the process. And I think if we make those changes, things will be in a much better place. And as we get into the major comprehensive plan update, we can take a look at some of these larger, more, they're actually the really comprehensive plan amendments. You can't make major zoning changes like a lot of these repeat applications are proposing without looking at how does it impact transportation, utilities, schools, residents. There's so many things that it impacts that it needs to be done in a large update process like the comprehensive plan and not in these little amendments. So thank you for your time. I encourage you to go back and think through the 3-year rule because I think 3 years is the right time frame, not 2. And look forward to having the conversation when you bring it to council in November 18th. We'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've now reached the final speaker, and that's Emmanuel Solis.
Emmanuel Solis, 2447 161st Avenue Northeast. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you, and thank you for this great discussion. Do you think that Bellevue has a vision where it wants to go? I certainly hope so, and it's defined as one of the kind of, actually is part of the vision of the City Council, have a longer-term idea of where the city should go. The CPA is pretty much the letter of that vision. What you see it's happening and it's where we want the city to go. So the CPA, as Mayor Chelminack said, it's not a fluid document. It's not something that you want to change every 2 years. If you feel that your vision is changing every 2 years, we have a problem. We're not going anywhere fast. Actually, we're not going anywhere. So think about that 2-year term. I think 3 years, it's a better term. It should be consistent with your vision. Don't act out of fear, act out of vision. Where do we want to go? Not what could happen that is wrong in our vision. If you think that the vision is wrong, there's ways to change that. If there's a project where the city, the developer, and the community have the same vision, there's ways to bring that forward. The city council initiated CPA is the obvious choice. Again, Bellevue has a vision. Don't feel like you have to go and ask, what's the vision the Kirkland has? What's the vision that this other city has? We're Bellevue. We have our problems. We have our visions. We have our challenges. Let's really push for our vision. I want the city, the developers, and the community to engage and drive that vision, not the fear or not just the developer interests. I will encourage you to accept the staff recommendation. I think a lot of people, a lot of energy, a lot of thought, and a lot of data went into it. I caution you that, again, the discussion was great. I think there's a lot of thought. You also are putting a lot of thought into that, but just consider that the 3-year limit was there, not out of, again, fear, but out of process, out of thought. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
So just so you know, don't act out of fear, act out of vision. I am so stealing that from you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe that that's also 3 on the comprehensive plan amendment. We had another general comment on the comprehensive plan amendment. This was more specific to the issue that the council is considering, so that's why I allowed the 3 speakers and then also Ms. Johnston. Is there anybody else who has signed up?
There is no one else on the list.
Okay, and we're pretty close to that half hour. So I'm going to close the public comment period and thank you all for being here and for keeping us moving. We are now moving on to, there are no reports of community councils, boards, or commissions. We're moving on to what are now 3 reports of the city manager, and we have added the development services fee update to that. Mr. City Manager, do you want to, how do we want to do those?
Sure, we're going to go ahead and go with the holdover from the study session,
Okay.
which is the development services fee.
Okay.
If the council doesn't mind. So tonight's session is part of the mid-biennium budget update. Tonight, staff will provide a presentation on 2 specific topics related to the city's mid-buy budget process. One is the proposed adjustment to permit fees. The second is a request to add 6 FTE positions to respond to the continued growth and workload. Tonight, staff will review the results of the annual cost of service study and how that informs the proposed fee permit structure for 2020. We'll also review with you and cover with you some of the continuing development workload that is driving the need for 6 new additional positions. And at the end of the presentation, staff will seek council direction to move forward with this in the final adoption of the mid-buy. So with that, we have Mike Brennan, our Director of Development Services. He's joined by Terry Jones, the Fiscal Manager for Development Services on his department. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Good evening, Mayor Chelminack, Deputy Mayor Robinson, members of the council. A quick just kickoff here to remind council of what's on the mid-biennium budget calendar. I'm standing in for our Finance and Asset Manager, Tony Call, just to remind council of where we are and what's to come. So last week you saw or heard a quick update on the mid-buy budget calendar. Tonight we are in front of council to share the proposed updates to the development services fees and a request for additional staff support, as City Manager Miyake mentioned. Next week, you have an overview of the general fund forecast and mid-buy adjustments and some other topics. On the 18th, study session, review of the capital and operating budget adjustments. And then on the 25th, follow up on any council items or questions, and then that is the night of the evening that the public hearing will be held on the proposed adjustments to the mid-biennium budget. And then tentatively, December 2nd would be the evening that the council would act. And there'd be a series of topics in front of the council that the council would act on, including the fees proposed this evening, property tax levy ordinance, property tax bank capacity resolution, and several other topics that generally come before the council for budget updates. So tonight, moving to the main topic of this presentation is the development services fee update. We are going to cover several topics as highlighted by Mr. Miyake, review of the proposed hourly rate updates and permit fee adjustments, quick review of the school impact fees. These are pass-through fees collected by the city but delivered to the Issaquah and Renton school districts. And then a request for additional FTE support. These would be fee-supported positions in development services to respond to the continuing growth in development activity in the city. So I'm going to hand over that clicker to Ms. Jones. She will walk through the fee adjustments, and then I will talk a bit more about kind of current development activity and the need for additional positions. Terry?
Thank you. The proposed rates are a result of our annual cost of service study and fee analysis that ensures that we are maintaining alignment with our financial policies and our cost recovery objectives. Our financial principles are that our funding should support the development services line of business through the economic cycles. Our permit applicants should pay for the services that they receive. Our fees should be predictable and understandable to the customer, and that we are regionally competitive. This is a reminder of our cost recovery objectives, ranging from 0% for policy, public information, and pre-submittal work that is general funded or utility funded, to 100% fee supported for review, inspection, and support service activities. The proposed fees are routine adjustments to our hourly rates, adjustments to the valuation-based fees, and to update our one-time flat fees. And these updates maintain alignment with our policies. Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Our building fee adjustments are to update the valuation data table published by the International Code Council and updates for CPIW, inflation of 1.7%, and the Washington State modifier, which decreased from 1.16 to 1.15 to align with the Washington State construction costs. The proposed increases to the hourly rates range from 2.4 to 2.8% to recover the increase in our costs for services. And updates for permit types with our flat fees include the hourly rate changes and the average review and inspection time. So this chart shows the proposed hourly rates for land use, transportation, fire, and utilities review and inspection, and the rates increase by $4 to $5, and these are derived from the total cost to perform the services. Examples of the fee changes for the proposed adjustments are shown in this slide. For the flat fee examples, there are 2 changes in fees for 2 common types of permits. A temporary use fee for land use review would increase by $4, and the fire inspection fee on a mechanical permit would increase by $8. A couple of valuation-based permit examples include fees for review and inspection work that's required to complete the permit. In the case of a minor commercial project, the change in fee would be $113. And for a single-family 500 square foot addition, the fee would decrease by $10, and this is where process improvements result in a lower cost to the customer. To ensure that we're regionally competitive, we've compared our fees to our neighbor jurisdictions, and this chart is for a comparison of 500 square foot single-family addition. The light blue bar is the 2020 proposed fees, and just below it are the current 2019 fees. Bellevue fees fall in the mid-range, where King County and Seattle fees are higher, and Renton, Issaquah, and Kirkland are lower. Comparing the valuation-based fees for the 250,000 valuation, again, Bellevue fees are in the light blue bar and also fall in the mid-range, where the county and Seattle fees are higher, and Renton, Kirkland, and Issaquah charge lower fees. And now I'm going to turn the time over to Mike.
So just a couple quick comments about the school impact fees, as I mentioned. These are a method that both the Issaquah and Renton school districts use to fund their capital programs. These are updated annually, and then we collect them for the school districts as a pass-through when we issue building permits. Again, there's no revenue that is collected and kept by the city of Bellevue. Real quick, the school districts, the residents of the city of Bellevue are served by 4 different school districts. The Bellevue School District, obviously the largest, Lake Washington School District, a very small area in the northern part of the city, and then the Issaquah and Renton school districts in the south part of the city. The impact fee adjustments being proposed by Issaquah and Renton affect both the single-family and the multifamily residential projects. The single-family impact fee for the Issaquah School District is dropping by $775, with an increase in the multifamily of $5,583 for a total of $9,583 to bring it in closer alignment with the single-family. Again, these are based on capital facilities plan needs and then the student generation rate in housing units for these different residential use types. Similar experience with Renton, with a reduction in the single family and an increase in the multifamily. Again, these are pass-through fees collected by the city. So just a few words about kind of the continuing development activity in the city, this ongoing high level of development that we've been experiencing for the past 5+ years is continuing to come through the city. We have seen a mix of development types. It's actually seen a significant amount of change in addition to the built environment. In our growth areas is where the focus has been, both in the Bellred and the downtown primarily, but also in the Eastgate and some in the Crossroads area. We have increased staffing, as is typical as we climb the development cycle, and have expanded the use of technology. And as you heard me report out earlier this year, we've reached 100% paperless permitting as one of our technology improvements and investments in technology. And we're always working to improve. So in the mid-buy budget amendments, we are proposing the addition of 6 FTEs. We would only hire these positions if the workload and the revenue supports them. We have essentially exhausted all the positions that have been allocated to us as we've been continuing to feel this development hit the city. We want to make sure we are delivering on our customers' expectations for predictable and timely services to them. So I'm just going to show a couple of quick graphs that really show the profile of development activity that we're seeing. One of the major metrics we watch is how many permits that we're processing, continuing to see a little bit of a bounce up this year and estimated to going into next. We've added some new permits, particularly for the small cell wireless, that will push that up a bit, as well as the ongoing residential and commercial activity. Our construction valuation remains high. We really started ramping back up again in the 2013 timeframe and have been bouncing around here at the $700 million plus range for the last 5 years. The largest kind of impact comes from the red and white striped bar, which are the major commercial projects that we see around town, with tower cranes swinging to the east over Bell Red and in the downtown. This is a quick just show of the review and inspection positions in development services. These are those that we add and we downsize as necessary, which we've gone through the last couple of development cycles where we've ramped up, and then subsequently on the downside reduced our staffing levels commensurate with the drop in workload and revenues. So again, those positions would help us continue to meet that demand as it continues to come at us. So a quick summary tonight, what we are seeking is council a direction to advance the updated consolidated fee ordinance with the adjustments that were described by Ms. Jones, to bring forward the ordinance to update the impact fees for the Renton and Issaquah school districts, and amend the development services budget to add or authorize 6 additional FTE positions that would be filled only when necessary and supported by permit fee revenue. So with that, we will turn it back to council for any questions or comments.
Great. Questions or comments? Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mike, for the thorough information. I did have a couple of questions. One is, in the packet, it talks about the fact that we do leverage consultants to do some of this work. So it looks like we have about 120 FTEs. How many consultants are currently being utilized? And are we converting some of those to FTEs or in addition?
So we are actually trying to add some additional consultants to the ability to respond to development. As far as the number of consultant contracts, I would have to go get the exact number. We're probably between 20 and 30 different consultants that we use for different disciplines. So structural review, geotechnical review, transportation review, et cetera. So we are continuing to work to kind of build our consultant option, because that is the quickest place we can go to bring support in. We only hire the employees when we see it's a longer term duration that we're forecasting. That continuity is what our customers want to see. So we do that when we see that in our forecast.
Yeah. No, I think it makes a lot of sense, because that corporate knowledge is really important. I was just trying to get a sense for that. And then the piece around the school districts, so only 2 out of the 4 school districts actually are part of our impact fees. So the Bellevue School District does their own in terms of how that, how development
the Bellevue School District does not use impact fees to support their capital programs. So, and I understand Lake Washington does not either. So just the Renton and Issaquah school districts, and that is really at their discretion. The Bellevue School Board has elected not to use that option.
Okay. And then the last one is, I really appreciate the fact that we, with our paperless, that we're able to be more efficient and effective, and it looks like some of the fees are actually going down. So I appreciate that. I think that sometimes the most frustrating part of this process is the process and the number of steps and the paperwork. So the more we streamline, I think it's a win-win for everybody. Thanks.
Councilmember Newenhouse.
Thank you, Mayor. Mike, great presentation. Thank you. First question on the staff right now in development services. Are we fully staffed? Are there open positions still?
So there are open positions. There are, I would say there are always open positions.
Sure.
Just with the number of staff, so there's always some amount of turnover.
Right.
So we do have several positions we are recruiting for now. The few that come to mind that I know of: a land use planner, structural engineer in building. I think we've got at least a couple of inspector positions that we're recruiting for, and a transportation engineer.
Okay. And then currently these 6 FTEs currently looking at right now, are those all support positions, or are they going to be across the board different roles as well? And are you going to experience the same maybe recruitment issues as you're seeing with other positions? So my long-term question here on this, on long-term growth for your department, is what else can we do to ensure that? Because I know your department is taxed. I'm looking at this this growth chart here. So even if we do get those 6 additional FTEs, at what point do you foresee additional support needed?
So this recommendation that we're advancing now, we think, along with the additional consultants that I just described and other things we're doing, should meet our needs. If we find that we need more and our revenue and workload is climbing, we probably would come back and knock on the council door again and ask for some additional help. But we're pretty confident that right now we're in pretty good shape. We can get our vacant positions refilled, and with these additional positions to deploy as needed, that we can continue to meet the need.
Okay. On the question, though, on what else we need to do in order to recruit and attract talent to the city of Bellevue, are there other things that we should be looking at, more creative ways to fill those open positions? And I know that Development Services is probably not alone in this issue. That's probably across departments, but are we looking at different creative ways to attract talent as well?
So we are working with our Human Resources Department staff to look at different options to make sure we're as competitive as we can be out there. Not only getting out and making the right connections and networking, but also making sure we're competitive in the workplace that we offer, the challenging work that we offer, et cetera. So we're trying to do a good job of marketing ourselves, and I think that's a big part of it. We have been successful in bringing in some great new talent, I will say that. It's hard to get, but once it arrives, they're very excited about being here.
Terrific, thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Great job for keeping up with the growth, we are experiencing. That's amazing. Especially, what you do in the 100% paperless application. These are the use of technology and, innovation. I hope you can keep doing those things. In terms of your staffing, of course, it's always challenge. People, resources, and of course, bottom line money. Are we still using temporary full-time equivalents? Is that one valve that you use?
So the temporary employees are the limited term employees, we call them, that only last for a maximum of 3 years. Isn't something that we found to be very successful in, particularly in a competitive, job market like today, as Councilmember Neuenhuis was mentioning. So we really go out and hire FTEs, but the reality is, as we go on the downside of a development cycle, we need to downsize our staffing levels as revenues fall off. So there's no position that's forever. It is, on demand, really, as we go up and down through development cycles. So we use FTEs just to make sure we're as competitive as we can be out in the job market.
Okay, so that has not been a problem. You don't foresee a problem?
No.
Okay, thank you.
So does everybody support moving forward, having them draft up the ordinance? I'm seeing nods to do that. I do have a question, procedural on the impact fees. So the development fees will come back when we're doing the mid-buy as we get toward I think that's the first Monday for passage. It's the first Monday of December, I believe. Are the development impact fees, do they come back separately
Yes,
from that?
they come back as a separate ordinance. It updates our code, that's my understanding.
Can they be handled on consent calendar? I think we have in the past.
I think we can do that.
Okay,
That's the
and
council's
I don't know
wish.
that it's tied to the December 2nd date, right?
No, it's
Okay.
not. So we can bring those back on consent.
Yeah, if we can if we can figure out, you can get the paperwork done and bring them back on consent, as long as council's okay with that. I'm seeing nods. We can get that out of the way and not have to worry about any discussion on that when we're finalizing the mid-buy. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
We have our next presentation, which I'm going to, since we added one, I'm just going to turn it over to the city manager to decide.
The next one is on winter weather preparedness. This item relates to the upcoming winter and how we're getting ready for that. We wanted to provide you an update on our preparedness and response efforts underway. And with that, I'm just going to go ahead and turn over to Mark Poe, our Assistant Transportation Director, for a presentation and to answer any questions you might have. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Good evening, Mayor Chelmanak, Deputy Mayor Robinson, and members of the council. As I bring up our presentation here, see if I can find it. All right, there we are. Nope. There we go. Okay, great. So just a brief update tonight on our winter weather preparedness. And as the city manager mentioned, we're also going to highlight tonight some enhancements that we've made in the area of communications. In terms of preparedness, we start looking at the seasonal outlook. This year is a neutral year, not a La Nina or El Nino year. So a broad variety of weather is to be expected. And even though we look at the seasonal outlook, we only really use it for information. What's more useful to us is the 0 to 14-day weather forecast. That helps us with our tactics and deciding how to prepare equipment and do interdepartmental coordination. To help us with that, we subscribe to WeatherNet, a Bellevue-based weather company that gives us consistent forecasts day after day. And then when we have an event, we can actually call them and talk to a meteorologist to help us with that day's preparations for weather response. In terms of equipment and materials, we did go through all of our equipment this summer, our plows and our sanders, everything serviced and ready to go. We finished stocking our materials, our sand and our liquid de-icers in October, so we're fully stocked, and so we're ready to go in that area. Very important thing that we do each year is our interdepartmental training. Transportation on our own does not have the resources, the staff, or the equipment to adequately respond to a significant winter weather event. So we do depend on the utilities, parks, and finance and asset management departments to help us with that. So we do a training day with everybody. That was completed this year on October 23rd. And then again, the events that we prepare for, transportation is lead for snow, ice, and wind events with the support from the other departments, and utilities department is lead for the flood events. And I'm happy to report that as of November 1st, we are winter weather ready. So I just briefly want to touch on last year's event, or last winter's event. It was actually this year in February, starting on Super Bowl Sunday. That was an extreme weather event. It's something that we expect, and looking back, happens once every 10 years on average, about 10% of winters. Despite the extremity of that event, we did have an effective response, and we outlined this for you at our at the February 19th study session. All our fire and police emergency calls were serviced. We actually did clear our priority streets fairly quickly and kept them clear, and had a number of internal and external communications. Internally, the Office of Emergency Management and Transportation was constantly sending out updates. Externally, we did have multiple website features and email alerts to our 11,000 email subscribers. We actually got 1,100 live calls to our dispatch center out at the Bellevue Service Center. Most of those calls were received with a live answer, taking the request for service and also providing helpful information such as where we're at in our priority street plowing. With any big event, there's always room for some continuous improvement. As you know, we had some issues trying to clear snow on the residential streets south of I-90 up in the higher hills. After multiple snowfalls and very, very hard freezes, it was hard to get that snow off the road. So what we did is we procured 5 new plow bits this year made of steel. Typically our plow bits are rubber to protect the buttons on the roadway. That's less of a concern in our neighborhoods, so we did buy those steel plows to help us if this event or this type of event, when it happens again, to be better ready to get those streets cleared. And then we have made some enhancements in our communications as well. So the comms team has added some additional enhancements based on the feedback from February. This includes some new tools and trying to reach out to an even broader audience. As an example, this summer, the comms team put together 5 commonly, consistently used messages during winter weather events, and now these messages can really quickly be leveraged, placed on bellevuewa.gov, out on our social media. And again, to broaden the audience, those messages have been translated into the top 5 non-English speaking languages here in Bellevue, and you can see that at the bottom left of this slide. Also, we've leveraged the very popular It's Your City newsletter, and in that, for the first time, we have an insert on weather preparedness. You see that on your slide, and I'm holding it up here. This provides extensive information, how to get help during emergencies, how to report hazards, how to avoid common problems during winter weather, like carbon monoxide poisoning, or just how we go about servicing our streets. All that information is included in here. And again, to broaden the audience with the help of our ADA and our Title VI office, we specifically have targeted helpful information for those with disabilities and accessibility needs. So you see that at the bottom right of your slide. And again, this has been translated into those top 5 non-English speaking languages, and we're just getting ready to get that up onto the website. So that's the quick report tonight. I'll turn it over for any questions.
Any questions? Councilmember Newenhouse.
Thank you. First of all, again, tremendous job by staff last year during, or not this last year, but in February. Yeah. And I think I read in the packet that, was like a 1 in every 10 years kind of snowstorm. So again, tremendous job. Just a couple of quick questions for you. You said new tools, but you didn't mention specifically what tools we're going to be using going forward. Can you shed some light on that?
So again, one example would be the tooling that we've done on our plow blades to address that problem.
Sorry. Okay, I meant new tools of communication, not new tools.
So that was highlighting, leveraging the It's Your City, this is the very first time that we've done an insert like this in the It's Your City. It's really the first time that we've more broadly translated the English language into our top 5 non-English speaking languages here in Bellevue. And it is the first time that we're actually reaching out to the disabled community with key messages just for them in this. So that's what I meant by tool.
Okay, great. And then once that's live on the website, are we going to share that aggressively across all social media platforms and across the app and everything else? Because I just feel like now's the time to be sharing this before people are frustrated because their neighborhood or their street hasn't been plowed in a couple of days. So I think the more information we can share now, the better off we are.
So noted. Thank you.
Okay, great. And then I'm just wondering, have you worked with, because I know one of the frustrations from our residents during the winter storm was about lack of garbage and recycling pickup. So have you worked with Republic at all on some of these communication tools and channels as well?
So transportation hasn't specifically. I do need to check in with utilities on what work has been done there. But yeah, that's one of many frustrations we experienced last February, and be happy to check in with them on that.
Okay, yeah. Again, anything we can do to collaborate with them, I think would be great.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ms. Robertson.
Yeah, I want to echo the amazing job. I know many of the people in the public don't know, but we had staff who couldn't get home working on the winter weather response, and they were sharing hotel rooms, working 12 hours on, 12 hours off for days on end. And I hope they know how much the council and the public appreciates the work they did. I certainly do. On this, I'm really happy to see this come back, but, my understanding was that we were going to do a postmortem on the event last winter. And one of the things that I expected to see was what we're going to be doing about the South Bellevue Hills. Some of them are very high, and although we were very good about clearing the priority routes, there were vast numbers of people that couldn't leave for days and days on end in the South Bellevue Hills. And I couldn't tell from looking at the service route priority map in the packet if we have changed any priorities. Or how we're going to address, other than having the metal bits on the plows, those South Bellevue higher hills in the future.
Sure. So we really haven't made any adjustments to the route map, because what we've found is those black routes are what we call the neighborhood connectors. We put about 25% of our resources on that when the snow is falling, and the 75% go to the red routes. We think those are the right routes. They're the best way to connect the residents back to those more major arterials, and we are limited with our resources, so we can't just draw lots of black routes on there and have the resources available to do that. I think the bigger question is when we have another event like this, how in the world are we going to get that repeated snow, then hard freeze, snow, then hard freeze? How are we going to get that off the roadways? And that's a very tough nut to crack. We do think the steel plow bits will help. We aggressively use both solid and liquid de-icers to try to speed that process, but when it gets down to 12, 13 degrees, it just doesn't work as well. The typical event, we get a snowfall, 12 hours later we have temperatures above freezing, and we're able to really easily get that off the road, and that's what we're hoping that the other 9 out of 10 years will have for us. But other than that, we just really don't have a lot of magic bullets on how to get, in that type of event, how to get those roads plowed faster.
Okay, yeah, because it seemed to me that we had a lot of repeats on roads that were pretty well cleared, which the 75%. Once everything's pretty well cleared, I think it would be useful, not that I'm a transportation, engineer, but to deploy more in the South Hills, as we did near the end of the event.
Yes.
But some of those areas hadn't seen a plow for 6 days, and then they saw one in 3 in 24 hours.
Right.
So just a little thoughtfulness on that before the next big event would be helpful. And as well as potentially timing some of those neighborhood routes if we do have another big snow event, timing the clearance of those routes ahead of when we know their garbage day is. I think that my colleague made a good comment about Republic. I fortunately, I don't think I was in that situation, but a lot of my neighbors were, because I live in one of those high hills. And yeah, it's really unfortunate if you have 3 weeks in a row of missed service.
Yeah.
Finally, on the language, we received a comment from someone that taught me something new, which is that there's 2 types of written Chinese language. Yes. There's simplified Chinese and there's traditional. And I would guess that most people who live in the United States, whether they come from mainland China or from Hong Kong, would be able to read traditional. But people who come from outside of mainland China may not be able to read simplified. So what are we doing? It says it's in the Chinese language. What are we doing on that?
Anything, Brad? I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
And so we'll have to research that and get back to you unless, Brad, do you have anything on that, sir?
We're working with our diversity team on that.
Okay.
Okay. It would, I think we need to make sure that we're attentive to that. If people from mainland China can read the traditional, then it seems like that would be the one to use, or do both. But we have a lot of people from both areas and who might read different types of Chinese, which was, like I said, something new to me.
Yes. Thank you.
Alrighty, and then have we given any more thought to purchasing a pumper truck that can go to the high hills? We didn't have a problem with a major fire on this snow event, but we did have many years ago where the pumper truck actually couldn't get up the hill. So I don't know if maybe that's not in your department, Mark, but
I can certainly find out.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, followed by Ms. Zahn.
So I'm curious as to how we liaise with our schools. I know that there is a lot of trouble with that. I'd like an answer to that. And also, I know the UW had a program with our city where they came up with technical or technological solutions to a lot of our city's problems. And one of them was a recommended snowplow route. That was very interesting. So I'm wondering if we're utilizing that recommendation at all.
Okay. So on the second question, not familiar with that or I'm not ready to answer that tonight. We'll try to get information on that. On the first question about the school districts, we reach out to both Bellevue School District and Issaquah School District each year. And in fact, we have that meeting set up for November 15th. We've had some issues trying to coordinate with Issaquah. They're not always available for that meeting. And we did have some issues in the south end where they went to snow routes. We weren't aware of those snow routes, and they ended up doing some temporary stops in places that might have been better elsewhere. So we're really looking forward to working with them this year. I know they're looking forward to working with us. So I'm very much looking forward to the meeting on November 15th to get that coordination done. And so look forward to that happening.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Zahn.
Yeah, thank you. I also echo the comment from Deputy Mayor about the city year, because I do remember seeing that that board about how we actually optimize the routes, because then even with the same equipment that we have and the same number of hours, we can actually get to more streets. And then I guess what I'm wondering on the snow routes is, if I think about access into and out of our city, then I'm curious about how that's coordinated with the adjacent cities so that we are able to get in and out, and has that been happening?
So those major routes, at least as they connect into Redmond, are pretty consistent with what their priorities are as well. So they're fairly well coordinated at the neighborhood, the black routes. There's no real connection to the adjacent.
But the arterials, the red ones
yeah,
are.
it's synced up as we can get them.
Okay. And then having been up to the service center during the storm and seeing the maps, one of the things that I'm curious about is, are we doing more around automating the GPS so that, I remember seeing little Post-it notes about where the trucks are, and are we moving towards more of a technology automated system?
And that's what I remember more about the Livable City project, but we are trying to move towards AVL, automatic vehicle location, and it's actually in our smart mobility plan. We've talked with the unions about it. They're in agreement now. So as we move forward, that's something that we're hoping to implement. Probably won't get implemented this year, but it is something in the longer term that we want to do, so that we're not skipping routes, so that we can report out on what routes we have done, and we can just better manage our resources.
Yeah, and then also better communicate. So if we do have that automated, then communities can actually see that here's the routes that are being plowed, here's where our trucks are. And so I think that would be really powerful if we could figure out a way to move that one up a little bit more.
Absolutely.
And then my only comment is, I did get the winterized in the mail, so thank you. And the multiple languages. I think we need to really accentuate, though, the preparing for storms, even if it doesn't happen, so that if folks do happen to be stuck at home, that they have provisions to be able to maybe house in place for X number of days, because these things are pretty unpredictable. So thank you, though. What I really actually appreciate the most is hearing the coordination between fire, utilities, and transportation, so that if we have some kind of a medical, that the streets are being cleared so that our fire can actually get there with their medical. So thank you for that.
And just as a reminder, anytime during an event on City Util 1, if we get a call from fire, we do move away from what we're doing and immediately service that call, whatever they need for us to do.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Lee.
I do want to voice the same appreciation for you guys working, during the special situations. I mean, like Councilmember Robertson mentioned. So thanks. And I also support the Councilmember Neuenhouse's emphasis on communication to the utility, waste pickup service. I had similar experience last year. Fortunately, I think the contractors, was pretty helpful. But it's good that, since you mentioned you haven't really talked to them, I think it's important so that, there won't be any, miscommunication or not lack of information. But finally, I appreciate Councilmember Robertson's pointing out that, Chinese language, the simplified language, for mainland Chinese recent immigrants, and then the normal traditional Chinese for, a significant number of Chinese. And I can read both of them, so I don't have any problem, but anyway. But the point also is that since you don't really have an answer yet, I can see I'd be very happy to be a resource for you, so it won't cost you anything, so.
Thank you.
The plow blades, are those 6 more plow blades to then attach to trucks, or did they replace, so we have the same number of blades?
They're interchangeable, so same number of trucks, but if we need to switch out a blade, then we can do that. We have enough, we have 15 rubber bitted plows, and then if we need to retrofit for a neighborhood for a situation like last February, we can do that.
So, and as I recall, some of the outtake from last year was we do have real, actual snow plows. I think we have 3 of them that we use, but those are most effective on the routes that are not as steep. So in other words, you can't really run them to the top of Somerset or the top of Lakemont.
Right.
Right?
So we repurpose the bigger 5-yard trucks that we have. They're not necessarily exclusively snow plows. They might be, assets for utilities or for transportation, but they're so large, they're really more effective on the 148s and the Bell Red roads that are flatter, wider. We use the 1-tons in the hills.
Right.
Yeah.
And any thought of, and it sort of flies in the face of some of the climate change here, but any thought of getting a few larger, because I know in the really heavy snow last year, those 1-tons would run for a while, and then the driver had to pull over and let it cool down.
Right. The transmissions would overheat, and one of the things that we're hoping to one day improve upon is to actually get more material storage up on top of the hill to prevent the running back down the hill and then going fully loaded up the hill, which gets that transmission good and hot before we put down the blades and start pushing snow around. So that would probably be more effective than anything.
Okay, and that was actually going to be kind of a second, was we had talked about after the event last year, we'd talked possibly deploying some heavy equipment to the higher hills, because I think one of the lessons last year was when you have multiple snowfall, you're not going to be able to move it with a 1-ton truck on a steep hill. So some things about potentially using front loaders and that type of thing.
Yeah. Yes.
Any ideas of possibly doing that?
We've thought of ways of shuttling material up the hills and, moving it from our locations, or, the problem with getting additional, higher horsepower vehicles, maybe a hybrid between a 5-yard dump truck and a 1-ton, is we don't really have a niche for that in our everyday work. Right. So because we repurpose those vehicles for snow response, we'd actually have to buy exclusive snow plows, which we just really haven't been ready to do yet or recommend yet. Okay. Because again, to put it in perspective, hopefully this was a 1 in every 10-year type of event. Watch it happen again this year, but we're hoping not.
Yeah, we definitely are hoping not. And I understand it, because that is really kind of the experience that those of us who've lived here for a long time have had, that you get a really bad year, and maybe it was 8 years, maybe it was 10, maybe it was 12, but there's generally a time in between. Any thought given to, if you do live on a steep hill, any thought given to trying to help out, at least for people who are able to walk up, to finding places where they can park their cars down a little bit lower and make that slog up the hill?
Absolutely, yeah. We encourage people to do that. We also encourage people to help each other out. When we plow a street, we'll usually leave a windrow, for instance, that can cover driveways. And for our elderly folks, if you're a neighbor to an elderly folk, if you could help them out, maybe shovel out the driveway. Those are the types of things that, even though the city doesn't have resource to do, we try to message that, and then we try to encourage people to follow up and do that as a good neighbor policy.
And then we also still continue to use the Bellevue Cares program to reach to some people, and that's really successful at reaching to some of the more vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that is a very important program. You're not looking for any action tonight other than no snow?
We'll be there if it does.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have our last item under the manager's report, which is an overview of the 2019 business survey results. We're going to just provide you a brief summary of the highlights. Just by way of background, this business survey is done every 2 years. And joining us this evening is Jesse Canuto, our Chief Economic Development Officer, and Philly Marsh, our Economic Development Manager. So that'll turn it over to the team.
Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and members of Council for making time on tonight's agenda for us. We are very excited to bring you a brief report on the results of the 2019 Business Survey. As the City Manager mentioned, for background, this is a survey that the city does every 2 years of our business community. We have been doing it every 2 years since 2015, so tonight's report represents the third set of data and responses from our business community. We are very happy to report that Bellevue continues to perform very strongly, with businesses responding with high levels of satisfaction across multiple indicators. Those areas where the businesses do note the strongest challenges or issues are in areas that are of regional significance, like housing and transportation, where the city is supporting regional solutions and providing leadership at the regional level. For purposes of demographics, I'd like to say that we work very closely with our consultant to make sure that the responses represent as closely as possible the Bellevue business community as a whole in terms of size, type, location, and industry. In terms of this year's responses, we are happy to report that we had the highest response rate yet, with over 1,000 businesses providing feedback on Bellevue's business ecosystem. In terms of who those responses represent, 58% of the business responses were from small businesses with 5 or fewer employees. Nearly 60% of businesses began doing business in Bellevue before 2010, so many of our longtime businesses are represented. And responses were received from businesses and entrepreneurs in every corner of the city. And with that, I'll turn it over to Philly to discuss some specifics.
Thank you, Jesse. The survey asked about broad city services, and we see that the majority of the results remain steady. Appearance of location has seen a statistically significant increase over the 2015 results, and in both 2017 and 2019, businesses feel there has been a significant improvement in the ability to get around town safely by biking or walking. Traffic and affordable housing for employees continues to be the biggest challenges for the businesses. Looking at a snapshot of business health, Bellevue continues to have a supportive business climate with top-line results remaining steady and positive. One highlight is that 91% of businesses report that Bellevue's economy is better than other Puget Sound cities and towns. Additionally, 80% of businesses continue to state that their business is somewhat or very strong. We do see that businesses are a little less optimistic on the anticipated economic growth of their business, but the majority of the employee talent pool is in Bellevue or elsewhere in the Puget Sound, and businesses report no anticipated changes in Bellevue-based employees. As Jesse mentioned, the survey does reflect some challenges that are consistent with growing economies, such as traffic and transportation, affordable housing, and access to talent and employees. The data from this survey is helping to inform the economic development plan update that is currently taking place, and you will hear a report on those efforts on December 2nd. The full business survey will be published on November 8th and posted on bellevuewa.gov/bizsurvey.
And with that, we will welcome any comments or questions from the council.
Well, we were thinking we would get done a little bit earlier tonight. I would kind of like to keep plowing along. That's kind of a joke off of the last one. But these are actually very, very good numbers. Show quite a bit of satisfaction. I'm glad that we do the business survey. I would say that while affordable housing and transportation are definitely regional issues, I think Bellevue in both of those two areas has really stepped up, not only with our participation regionally, but with money placed toward that. We have our largest affordable housing fund that we have ever had. That's something that council has prioritized. Plus a $100 million loan to do a bunch of more street work, plus the regular street work going on, I think shows Bellevue's commitment on those two. We also understand that business and others see those as probably the two crucial and critical issues. So if you don't mind, unless there's some absolute brilliance that has not been, that was my challenge. I really would like to move us along. You sure can.
Actually, not even a question, suggestion. Two quick suggestions for you, Jesse. One, I'd like to see this survey done every year. I think the pace of business increases consistently and constantly, and I think it would give us a better understanding if we do come across any issues of companies, especially large employers, if they're looking to leave, and then we can hopefully nip that in the bud. Second of all, I'd love to see in the next report this broken down by sector, because there's nuance to each one, right? So retail, restaurant, tech, et cetera. I think it'd be great to have that same understanding rather than lumping it all together if we truly are seeing the same numbers across all those different sectors. Thank you. I'm not sure that rose to brilliance, Mayor, but thank you for the time.
It didn't quite get there, but it was close. And so I know Ms. Zahn will also at least get there.
One very quick piece. So in the comments where it says why the wrong direction, it says unfriendly to small and local businesses. I would like to understand a bit more about that. I mean, if it's because the cost of retail, the space is very expensive, but if there's more than that, I'd really like to drill down into that a bit more.
Yeah, so we did look at that, and that is a subjective answer. So it's as people commented it, and we saw that as well and looked through all of those comments. And the majority of those comments are based on rents and the increase in rents that are going on. So we see that, and that's something that we're continuing to look at through the economic development plan update, how we can continue to support our small businesses.
Yeah, that would be great, because especially the local businesses, they're a bedrock of our community. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And thanks for the report. I know it's available online. It'll be part of the packet, and great. So I think we're going to move on to the next item. There's no council business and
There is.
There is?
One item.
I missed it.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I am sorry. You are correct.
I'll try to be brief. I wanted to take a moment and note two special events going on this week. We're looking forward to welcoming our Yao Japan delegation to the city of Bellevue. Yao was Bellevue's first sister city, and 2019 marks the 50th anniversary of that relationship. For this celebration, we are pleased to welcome 12 members of the Yao delegation. City officials include Mayor Keisuke Daimatsu and Councilmember Shingi Tanaka. And Bellevue will be hosting two events. On Wednesday, November 6th from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. we will have the 50th anniversary tree dedication at the Bellevue Botanical Garden. And then on Thursday, November 7th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. there will be an anniversary reception here at City Hall. Yao has been a wonderful partner over the years. I led the most recent official city delegation to visit them, and that was in 2017, and we invited them here for the 50th anniversary of our sister city relationship, and I'm thrilled that they have accepted and will be coming. We had a really wonderful time. We had a large delegation go to Yao 2.5 years ago, and they really treated us very well, showed us the best of their city and their nation. I would note that when we think our city council meetings are getting long and there might be a few too many of us, they have something like 40 council members. I didn't count the chairs, but it looks like a legislative chamber, so it's a little bit different. That's not something I propose that we adopt. But anyway, I'm looking forward to continuing the special relationship with Yao for another 50 years and for the events this week, and would like to make sure I invite the council and the community to those. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sister cities are a very important part of the fabric of the community, so we appreciate that. Now moving on to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to adopt?
I move that we adopt the consent calendar. Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt the consent calendar. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent calendar is adopted. We have a public hearing. I am accusing staff of trying to get every single easement hearing in before I'm done, because I love them so much. So we're ready for a report on this particular easement issue. Then we'll open the public hearing, see if there's any testimony, and then see if we can give you direction and pass a resolution.
Thank you. Just one quick note is at the conclusion of the public hearing, we'll be asking council to take an action on a proposed resolution. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Natasha Playton with our real property agent.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is a very short staff report on a request to release a water easement located at 221 140th Avenue Northeast. And tonight's public hearing is to allow the public an opportunity to comment on this release. The property owner is developing a two-lot short plat, and the water main and water meter were abandoned with the development of the property. The water easement, shown in green, is no longer needed as the new water meters were connected to the existing water main in an existing utility easement located within Northeast Second Place. Following the staff report and public hearing, staff will request council action on the proposed resolution authorizing the release of this water easement. This ends our staff report. Any questions?
Any questions for staff? I have a very quick one. Do we need to, if we make the motion to adopt, do we need to add that the effective date is November 4th, 2019? That this is odd, the way it reads here to me. I don't know if we need to actually add that or not. If not, we'll just make sure that that is the effective date.
Just hold on just a moment, Mayor.
Yeah, it should be a 5-day ordinance. I'm not sure why it would say November 4th.
It's a resolution,
Or, I'm sorry, resolution.
so it would be adopted.
Oh, immediately.
Okay, that
Okay,
would
you're
be
right.
in the normal course. We don't have to, okay, great. All right, I would entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
I move that we open the public hearing. Second.
Moved and seconded to open the public hearing on the easement, the relinquishment of the easement. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The public hearing is open. Do we have anyone who has signed up to speak?
There is no one signed up.
No one signed up to speak. Anybody who wishes to speak to the council on this easement? Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
I move that we close the public hearing. Second.
Moved and seconded to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We now have a recommendation that the council take action and pass Resolution 9675. Is there a motion?
I move that we pass Resolution 9675, authorizing the execution of documents necessary to release an existing water easement located at 221 140th Avenue Northeast. Second.
Moved and seconded to do that. Any comment? Any question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. If you have not voted, I encourage you to get out to the post office and drop your ballot in the mail tomorrow. And if you're watching this later in the week, you probably already know what happened. So with that, and seeing no other business to come before the council, we're adjourned.